The N effect. You ever wonder why it's easier to push yourself when there's just one other person in the room watching? Or why you feel weirdly more motivated during a small class test than a big nationwide exam? That's not a coincidence. It's something your brain is doing on purpose. There's this weird little glitch in our psychology called the N effect. N, as in the number of people you're up against. And the smaller that number, the harder you try. The moment the crowd gets bigger, your motivation takes a nosedive. Sounds backward, right? You'd think more competition should fire you up, make you hustle harder. But nope, the opposite happens. And here's where it gets freaky. Even if the reward stays the same, even if the task doesn't change, the moment we feel like the number of competitors has increased, our brains say screw it. What's the point? Imagine two students, same test, same prize. One of them is told they're competing against 4 people. The other one thinks it's 4,000. The one who thinks the odds are tighter. They try harder, score higher, feel more in control. Because deep down, our brains hate long odds. They hate the feeling of being swallowed by a crowd. It's like this: you're in a room with 2 other people. There's one cookie on the table. One of you gets it. That feels doable, right? You can size up your chances. You can measure yourself against 2 faces. Your brain goes, I can win this. Let's go. Now put 50 people in the room. Same one cookie. Suddenly, it feels impossible. And when something feels impossible, you check out. You might not even try. Your brain pulls the plug before you fail. To protect your ego. That's the N effect in action. The more people we compete with, the less we care. Not because the prize matters less, but because our brain decides it's not worth the emotional risk. And this isn't just theory. It shows up in places you'd never expect. Online auctions. Bidders go harder when there are fewer participants. Classrooms. Test scores drop when kids are told they're competing against a big pool, even if the test itself is the same. Sports. Solo matchups create more tension, more drive, more fire, because there's no one else to blame. But here's the real punch. This messes with our motivation without us realizing it. You don't feel yourself giving up. You just subtly lean back. You scroll a bit longer. You tell yourself you'll try harder later, but you don't. Because your brain already wrote the story. It decided the odds were too long, and that quiet decision ruins your effort before it even starts. Now think about what this means in your everyday life. When you're applying for a job and see thousands of applicants, you feel deflated before you even click submit. Not because you're not qualified, but because the crowd feels unbeatable. So you procrastinate. You edit your resume 6 times. You close the tab. When you start a YouTube channel and see that millions of others are already crushing it, paralyzes you. Not because you don't have ideas, but because your brain whispers, what's the point? You're late. You're lost in the crowd. And that quiet voice, that's the N effect stealing your drive. But here's the twist nobody tells you. The crowd is mostly fake. The N effect isn't reacting to reality. It's reacting to perception. Your brain doesn't need to see 4,000 real people. Just the idea of competition is enough to short-circuit your ambition. So if you change what you focus on, you change how hard you try. Instead of looking at a massive market or a global competition, zoom in. Shrink the battlefield. Make it feel local, personal, human-sized. Compete with one person, one goal, one habit. Say you want to grow on social media. Instead of comparing yourself to everyone, just try to outdo your last video. Make it 1% better. Instead of thinking about a sea of other creators, just imagine one. Picture a single viewer, one human being watching. That's it. Because when the competition shrinks, your confidence grows, and when you feel like you can win, you actually try. And when you actually try, you move. You get momentum. And momentum, that's when everything changes. This is why some of the most elite performers in the world isolate themselves. Fewer distractions. Fewer comparisons. They shrink the world around them until it's just them versus the task. One shot, one opponent. And it works. Because motivation doesn't come from the size of the reward. It comes from believing you have a real chance. That's the secret. You don't need more inspiration. You don't need another motivational quote. You need to feel like the race is winnable. And you can create that feeling by changing how you frame the challenge. Stop thinking you're one in a million. Start thinking you're one of 3. Trick your brain into focusing, into caring. The N effect isn't about how many people are actually in the game. It's about how many people your brain thinks it has to beat. So stop letting your mind get overwhelmed by the crowd. Shrink the room. Sharpen your focus. Make it feel close, personal, immediate. And watch how fast your drive comes back. Because the fewer faces you see ahead of you, the faster your feet start to move. The Ben Franklin Effect. You ever notice how doing someone a favor can change the way you feel about them? Not the other way around. Not because you already liked them, but because helping them made you like them. Sounds upside down, right? That's exactly what the Ben Franklin Effect is. Your brain gets confused when your actions and your feelings don't line up, so it picks one to change. And usually, that's your feelings. Let me paint a picture. There's someone you really don't like. Maybe they're rude. Maybe they've insulted you before. Or maybe they just have that smug face that makes your blood pressure rise. Now imagine that person comes to you and says, "Hey, could I borrow something of yours?" Something small, like a book, a charger, just a quick favor. For some reason, you agree. You say, "Sure, whatever, here you go." You're not doing it out of kindness. You're doing it out of politeness or maybe pressure. But guess what happens next? Days later, when you think about that person, something feels different. You're not as annoyed. You're not as cold. You might not be friends, but the edge is gone. That right there is the Ben Franklin effect in full force. It's named after the man himself, who used it as a social hack long before psychology ever caught up. There was this political rival of his who didn't like him at all. So Franklin didn't try to flatter him. He didn't debate him. He didn't even try to change his mind. Instead, he did something smarter. He asked the man to lend him a rare book from his personal library. That's it. One book. The man said yes. Franklin thanked him, returned it a week later, and suddenly, boom, their relationship started to shift. The guy warmed up to him. They weren't enemies anymore. Why? Because lending a book to someone you hate doesn't make sense. So the brain goes, maybe I don't hate him. Maybe I kind of respect him. Maybe we're all right. It's not about the book. It's about the brain fixing a contradiction. You did something nice for someone you're supposed to dislike. That creates tension. And your mind hates tension. It needs a clean story. So it rewrites the emotion to match the action. That's what makes this effect so powerful. It bypasses logic. It goes straight into your identity, into your sense of who you are and how you feel about others. And here's the kicker. It works both ways. If you want to make someone like you, ask them to help you. Not in a desperate, clingy way, but in a way that makes them feel useful, appreciated, important. Ask for their opinion. Ask for a small favor. Let them open a door for you, literally or metaphorically. Because the moment they invest even a tiny bit into you, their brain starts to defend that investment. Suddenly, you matter more. You're no longer a stranger. You're someone they've helped. And that makes you someone they must like, at least a little. Now think about how many times this plays out in real life. You start a new job, and the person training you is warm, helpful, checks in with you. You assume they're just nice. But part of what's happening is that they start liking you more because they helped you. It gives them a role, a sense of connection. Same thing happens when someone asks you for directions, and you actually take the time to explain. That tiny moment of assistance creates a micro bond. You're both just humans helping each other out, and your brain doesn't want to argue with that. This works in relationships too. Romantic, professional, whatever. If you're trying to get closer to someone, don't always be the one giving. That sounds noble, but it puts you in a weaker position. Instead, find ways for them to contribute to you. Ask for feedback. Ask for help with a decision. Ask them to show you something they're good at. It's not manipulation. It's psychology. It's a dance of mutual respect and connection. And when someone invests in you, they tend to stick around. But here's where things get a little dangerous. Just like the effect can be used for good, it can be twisted. Smart marketers use it all the time. Ever notice how you feel more loyal to a brand after filling out a quick survey or giving them a review? That's not a coincidence. The moment you do something for them, you feel more attached. Your brain rewires the narrative. You say, I must like this company. I took the time to help them out. Boom. Loyalty created. Not because of what they gave you, but because of what you gave them. It even shows up in cults, in groupthink, in toxic relationships. The more someone gets you to do for them, the more you convince yourself they must be worth it, even when they're not. That's why understanding the Ben Franklin effect isn't just interesting. It's crucial, because it's happening around you all the time, whether you see it or not. So what do you do with this knowledge? First, use it wisely. If you want to connect with someone, don't just try to impress them. Invite them into your world. Ask for something small. Let them feel needed. That's where trust starts to grow. And second, watch for it in reverse. Notice when your feelings toward someone shift after you've helped them. Ask yourself, do I really like this person? Or is my brain just cleaning up the story? Because at the end of the day, your brain wants things to make sense. If your hands are being generous, your heart will try to catch up. That's the Ben Franklin effect. Simple favor. Massive shift. All because your mind refuses to believe you'd ever help someone you didn't already believe in. The identifiable victim effect. Picture this. You're scrolling your phone, and you see a photo of a little girl. She's sitting in the dirt, holding a worn-out teddy bear, eyes locked on the camera. There's a short story underneath. Her name is Amina, she's 6, and she hasn't eaten in 2 days. Now, 2 minutes later, you see a different post. This one says over 2 million children are starving across the region. Same crisis, much bigger number, but something weird happens. You feel less, not more. That massive number should hit harder, right? But it doesn't. In fact, it almost makes you shut down. This isn't heartlessness. It's wiring. And there's a name for it: the Identifiable Victim Effect. It's the way our minds are built to care more about one person with a name and a face than about thousands or even millions of nameless people. It goes completely against logic. You'd think the bigger the problem, the bigger our emotional reaction. But no. When we're shown a single victim, something clicks. It feels human. It feels real. It triggers empathy. But when the numbers grow, strangely, our compassion shrinks. It becomes statistics, abstract, cold. And this is the same reason you'll see charity campaigns focused on just one child or one family, even if the organization is helping thousands. Because they know we don't relate to numbers. We relate to stories. We don't picture a million people crying. We picture one, and we feel for them. There's a classic study that shows how powerful this effect really is. Two groups were asked to donate to a cause. One group got hard facts, statistics, millions in danger. The other group got just one profile, a single person with a name and a photo. You already know which group gave more, not just slightly more, dramatically more, all because they were focused on one face instead of an ocean of suffering. Now, this isn't just about donations. This shapes the way we see the world. Think about the news. A school shooting gets national attention. We learn the names of the victims. We see their faces, hear their parents speak, and we cry for them. But then we hear about a distant war where 10,000 people have died, and somehow it feels far away. Not because we don't care, but because we can't feel that much pain at once. We're wired to focus on what we can mentally hold, and we can only hold so much. The identifiable victim effect is baked deep into us. It's emotional triage. Our ancestors didn't evolve to process global suffering. They responded to what was in front of them. One person, one tribe member, one story. That was enough. And now, centuries later, we still work the same way. Even when you know this, you'll catch yourself doing it. You'll hear that someone in your own town needs help, and you'll jump to act. But hear that an entire country is underwater from a flood, and your brain goes numb. The scale overwhelms you, so you detach. It's not because you're broken. It's because your emotional system isn't built for scale. And let's be honest, this shows up in some uncomfortable ways, too. A missing person case becomes a national obsession when the victim is young, photogenic, and relatable. Meanwhile, hundreds of others disappear in silence because their stories don't feel as grabbable. They're not as emotionally vivid. That's the dark edge of the identifiable victim effect. Not all faces get the same spotlight. Not all lives get the same empathy. So what do we do with this knowledge? How do you protect yourself from falling into selective compassion? The first step is being aware of it. Noticing when your heart opens up for one person and goes numb when the numbers rise. You have to ask yourself, am I feeling less because it's less real or just because I can't see it? And if you're someone who wants to lead, who wants to influence, who wants to actually move people to act, then you need to understand this effect on a practical level. If you want people to care, don't just show the problem. Personalize it. Tell the story. Put a face to it. Because once something feels human, people move. They help. They give. They speak up. Even in your everyday life, this shows up. Think about how you respond when someone you know personally is going through something hard. One friend, one colleague. You check in. You offer support. But hear that dozens of people in your city are going through the same thing. And suddenly, there's distance. That's the effect quietly steering your emotions without asking for permission. But here's the beautiful part. It also means our empathy is powerful. That human connection does move us. We just have to bring it into focus. Sometimes that means turning down the volume on the statistics and turning up the story. Not because the facts aren't important, but because the story is what makes us feel. So if you ever want to cut through the noise, if you ever want to inspire real compassion in a world drowning in data, zoom in. Forget the million. Show me the one. Let me meet the face, feel the heartbeat, understand the name. Because when people can see the pain, when they can feel the story, they don't just scroll, they stop. They listen. They act. That's the identifiable victim effect. One face, one name, one story that changes everything. Cheerleader effect. Ever see a group photo and think, wow, they all look pretty good? And then you look closer at each person individually, and it's not quite the same vibe. Yeah, that's the cheerleader effect in action. Also called the group attractiveness effect. It's the weird psychological trick where people seem more attractive when they're standing in a group than when they're seen alone. And this isn't just some casual observation people make at parties. It's a real, studied phenomenon. Our brains literally rate individuals as better looking when they're part of a crowd. And not just any crowd, a decently attractive one. You blend the faces together in your head without even realizing it. You smooth out the flaws. You average up their features. And suddenly, boom, the whole group glows a little. But let's be honest, this explains a lot. Think about sitcoms. The friend group always looks cooler together than any one of them does alone. It's why band members seem more magnetic when they're on stage together. But if you see one of them alone at a coffee shop, they might not turn heads. It's why you might feel like you looked better in that group pic from the wedding, even if your face alone didn't change. When people look at you in a group, your perceived attractiveness gets a subtle boost. Not because you changed, but because of the company you kept. Now, let's break down why this happens. It all comes down to how the brain processes faces. When we look at a group, our visual system doesn't analyze each face in perfect detail. It takes shortcuts. It averages the features of the group, especially the eyes, nose, and mouth. And here's the kicker: averaged faces tend to be rated as more attractive, more symmetrical, more balanced. So when your brain averages the group, it creates a kind of mental composite that's more appealing than any one person might be on their own. And because your brain can't help itself, it starts projecting that composite glow onto each individual. That's why someone might seem more appealing when they're standing next to others, even if those others aren't necessarily better looking. It's the context that shifts the perception. But there's another layer to this. Social proof. When someone's in a group, especially a confident, fun, good-looking group, they don't just benefit from visual averaging, they benefit from association. Your brain says, if these people hang out with them, they must be interesting, or fun, or cool. You assign traits based on the group dynamic, and that spills over into physical attractiveness. Confidence is contagious. Status rubs off. People borrow appeal from the energy around them. This is also why first impressions are shaped so heavily by how you show up, not just what you look like. Walk into a room alone and unsure of yourself, and you might go unnoticed. But walk in with the right group, all laughing and connecting, and suddenly you shine. You haven't changed your face, but your presence did. It works the other way too. Someone you thought was super attractive might seem less, so when you see them alone in a quiet room, without the glow of the crowd, that wow factor can fade when the group context disappears. And it's not about faking anything, it's just how perception works. Your brain is lazy. It fills in gaps. It relies on shortcuts. And in groups, those shortcuts often work in your favor. This is why brands use this effect constantly. Think of ads. You rarely see one model alone. It's a squad, a crew, a vibe, people smiling together, having fun. You're not just sold a face, you're sold a feeling. You want in on that energy, that chemistry, that group glow. And without realizing it, you start thinking, that person looks great. But what you're really responding to is the whole package. The environment, the social cues, the emotional pull of togetherness. And here's where it gets really practical. If you want to make a stronger impression in social settings, don't isolate yourself. Get in the mix. Be part of the energy. When you're in a group, especially one that vibes well, you tap into the cheerleader effect automatically. You don't have to be the best looking person in the room. Just being with the right energy amplifies how others perceive you. It even works in photos. Look at dating apps. Group pics get more attention than solo selfies when they're done right. Not the blurry bar photos or awkward cropped arms kind. The ones where everyone looks like they're having a good time, relaxed, natural. Those send a subtle signal this person is likable, social, part of something. And your brain fills in the rest. The person becomes more attractive, not just because of their face, but because of the context you've wrapped it in. But here's something to keep in mind. It's not about hiding behind a group or pretending to be someone you're not. It's about understanding that perception is elastic. It bends based on surroundings. You're not just seen for who you are, but for how you appear in context. So if you want to tilt that in your favor, be intentional about the settings you put yourself in, who you're around, the energy you bring, the way people feel when they see you. Because whether it's fair or not, humans are group creatures. We're drawn to connection, to signals, to shared emotion. And when you show up in a group that's radiating good energy, your presence rides that wave. You get the boost. You get the halo. Not by standing out, but by fitting in just right. That's the cheerleader effect. Group glow. Perception warp. One of the simplest ways to look more attractive without changing a single thing about your face. Mimicry effect. You ever find yourself picking up someone's slang without even meaning to? Or maybe you start crossing your arms when they cross theirs, or leaning in when they lean in. It's subtle, sometimes barely noticeable, but it happens constantly. And when it does, something strange kicks in. People start liking each other more. They feel connected, aligned, comfortable. That's the mimicry effect, also called the chameleon effect. It's this bizarre, almost invisible psychological reflex where we unconsciously mirror other people's behavior, facial expressions, tone of voice, gestures, and the wild part is, we do it without thinking. It just happens. And when it does, it quietly builds trust, warmth, and chemistry between people. Now here's the thing. This effect isn't about flattery. It's not imitation in the obvious way. You're not copying someone like a parrot. It's way deeper than that. It's your nervous system tuning itself to someone else's vibe. And when that sync happens, both people start to feel it. You feel seen, understood, safe, and you probably don't even notice it when it's happening. That's what makes it so powerful. You're in a conversation, and the person across from you is smiling gently, nodding, speaking slowly, and without realizing it, you start doing the same. Your tone softens. You nod back. You match their rhythm. That subtle sync sends a signal: I get you. I'm with you. You can trust me. This is why great salespeople, therapists, negotiators, even con artists know how to mirror people. Not in a creepy, obvious way, but in a natural, almost hypnotic way. And it works, because mimicry creates comfort. It tells the brain, this person is part of my tribe. They're safe. They're familiar. I like them. There's a classic experiment that proves how real this is. Two people have a conversation. One of them, an actor working for the researchers, subtly mirrors the participant's posture and mannerisms. Nothing too obvious, just soft copying. At the end, participants were asked how much they liked the person they talked to. And the ones who'd been mirrored, they rated that person way higher. More likable, more persuasive, more trustworthy, all because of mimicry. It wasn't what was said, it was what was matched. And it starts early. You ever notice how babies will mimic your expressions? You stick out your tongue, they do it back. You smile, they light up. That's not just cuteness, it's brain development. Mimicry is how we first learn connection. It's how we read people. And as adults, we never stop doing it. We just get way better at hiding the fact that it's happening. You also see it in close friendships and relationships. Couples who are deeply connected will start to mirror each other's speech patterns, body language, even facial expressions over time. They start finishing each other's sentences, not because they planned it, but because they've literally synced up. Their brains have gotten used to each other's rhythms. And here's something really fascinating. Mimicry doesn't just increase liking, it also predicts it. When someone naturally starts to copy your body language, there's a good chance they already feel some level of connection. Their brain is saying, I like this person. I want them to like me back, so it mimics to build that bridge. But it's not foolproof. You can't just fake it. If mimicry feels forced, it backfires. People can smell inauthenticity. So it's not about trying to copy someone. It's about tuning into them, being present, feeling the tempo of the moment. Because when you're truly present with someone, your body automatically starts to adjust. You slow down when they slow down. You gesture when they gesture, and it just feels right. This is why charismatic people seem to have that magnetism. They're not just talking. They're mirroring. They're picking up on the vibe in the room, adapting their tone, adjusting their energy. It's subconscious for them, and it draws people in like gravity. Think about the last time you felt an instant connection with someone. You probably laughed at the same rhythm. You probably mirrored each other without even noticing. You probably felt like you were on the same wavelength. That's the mimicry effect, doing its quiet magic in the background. And it works even when you're not face to face. On the phone, if someone speaks softly, you tend to soften your voice too. If someone gets excited, your energy spikes in response. It's like an emotional echo, and it helps people feel heard. Here's where it gets practical. If you want to make someone feel comfortable, understood, and connected, don't force a smile or a compliment. Instead, slow down and listen. Watch how they move, how they sit, how they speak, then gently, naturally, match that rhythm, not to manipulate, not to fake, but to build a bridge, a subtle one. Because when people feel mirrored, they feel valued. They feel like you're on their side, even if they can't explain why. But be careful. This effect can be used for good or for manipulation. Some people mimic to charm their way into your trust and get something from you. It's subtle, it's powerful, and it works. So if you ever feel a little too swept up by someone, ask yourself, is this real connection? Or is someone playing the mirror game? Still, for most people, this isn't about tricks. It's about tuning in. We're all wired to connect, and mimicry is one of the oldest tools in the kit. When we mirror each other, we stop feeling separate. We move in sync. And in a world that's constantly pulling us apart, that kind of resonance is rare and unforgettable. That's the mimicry effect. Quiet, subconscious, powerful. It's not about changing who you are. It's about matching energy, matching presence, and letting connection happen naturally. The gain-loss theory of attraction. You ever have someone who didn't really like you at first, and then, over time, they slowly warmed up to you? And weirdly, that shift made you like them more than if they had just liked you all along. That's not random. That's psychology. Specifically, the gain-loss theory of attraction, and it flips the script on how we think connection works. Here's the basic idea. When someone starts out feeling neutral or even a little negative toward you, and then gradually becomes more positive, that change feels more powerful than steady, consistent approval. The gain in their affection feels earned, and because of that, it hits harder. It matters more. Now, imagine the reverse. Someone who liked you in the beginning, but over time, that warmth cools off. Suddenly, they're a little distant. They laugh less. They compliment you less. It stings more than if they never liked you to begin with. That's the loss side. We don't just react to how people feel about us. We react to how those feelings change. It's all about momentum. Emotional trajectory. Human brains are addicted to movement, especially upward movement. So when we feel like we've won someone over, when we've shifted their opinion of us in a good direction, it sparks something deep. It feels like progress, like growth, like a win, and that win creates attraction. Let's be real, most of us are drawn to the challenge. If someone loves us from day one, that's nice, but it can also feel flat. There's no arc, no reward. But when someone's opinion of us changes, when we earn their respect, their warmth, their attention, it hits different. It feels valuable, deserved. It boosts our self-esteem in a way that steady praise never could. There's a classic study that proved this. Participants interacted with someone who either consistently liked them, consistently disliked them, or gradually changed from dislike to like. The people who experienced that shift, that gain in approval, reported the strongest feelings of attraction toward the other person, not the consistent praise, not even the mutual niceness. It was the change that mattered, the movement from cold to warm. That's the gain-loss theory, and it's why some of the most intense relationships start off rocky. You clash, you misunderstand each other, there's tension. But then, slowly, something shifts. You see a new side of them. They start to open up. They get your humor. They see your value. That change in energy creates emotional gravity. It makes you feel like the connection is growing, and that growth pulls you in. It's also why we sometimes obsess over the one person who didn't like us at first, or the one who went cold, because loss is painful, and the hope of regaining what we lost keeps us mentally hooked. We replay the moment the shift happened. We wonder what we did. We crave that earlier warmth. Our brains treat it like an emotional stock market, and we want those numbers to go back up. Here's where this gets even more interesting. It's not just about what the person feels. It's about how obvious the change is. If someone subtly warms up to you over time, and you notice that shift, your brain registers it as meaningful. It feels like progress, like you've had an effect on them. And that feeling of being able to change someone's emotional state is deeply rewarding. Because let's face it, being liked is nice, but feeling like you mattered to someone's story, that you changed their mind, changed their feeling, that's intoxicating. You see this all the time in movies and shows. The cold character who slowly softens, the rival who becomes the ally, the enemy turned friend. We eat that stuff up because that emotional transformation feels earned, and anything earned feels more real, more valuable, more magnetic. It works in the opposite direction too. The second someone starts pulling away, even subtly, our attraction to them often increases. Not because they're better, but because our brains go into panic mode. We want the gain back. We crave the return of that early connection. That's the lost side. And it can be just as powerful, if not more painful. But here's the warning: this effect can get manipulative. If someone intentionally withholds approval or plays hot and cold, they're not building genuine attraction. They're triggering emotional confusion. It's the same principle behind toxic push-pull dynamics. Your brain gets addicted to the change, not the person. So you end up chasing validation, not connection. So what's the takeaway? If you're looking to build real attraction, don't try to be perfect from the start. Let people warm up to you. Let there be space for growth, for layers, for unexpected turns. Be a little complex, a little surprising. Show up fully, but don't unload everything at once. Because when people discover new reasons to like you over time, those reasons stick. And if you find yourself obsessing over someone who once liked you and now doesn't, take a step back. Ask yourself, do I actually like them? Or am I just hooked on the idea of getting that emotional gain back? Sometimes we're chasing the feeling of progress more than we're chasing the person. The gain-loss theory reminds us that emotions aren't static. Attraction isn't static. It's movement that creates meaning, a heart that changes direction, whether toward us or away, always hits harder than one that stays flat. That's what makes connection so human. It's not just about how someone feels about you. It's about how they get there. And the path they take, whether it's rocky or smooth, often matters more than the final destination. The Pseudocertainty Effect. You're given a choice between two options. In the first one, there's a small chance you'll face a big loss. In the second one, the loss is still technically there, but someone's tweaked the framing just enough to make it feel like that risk is gone. Gone. Like it's been cleaned up, simplified, made emotionally safer. Most people instantly go for the second one, even if the math is exactly the same. That's the pseudo-certainty effect. One of the weirdest ways our brains trick us into making irrational decisions, and it comes down to this: when we're facing uncertainty, and someone offers us the illusion of certainty. Even if it's not real, we jump on it. Our minds crave clarity, safety, closure. So if someone takes a complex, risky situation and frames part of it like it's a done deal, we breathe easier. Even if the risk hasn't actually changed, even if the so-called safe choice is no better, or even worse, we'll lean toward whatever feels certain. It's not about facts. It's about the emotional comfort of false security. Let's break it down with a classic example. Say you're told there's a deadly disease that might hit your city. You're offered two plans: In Plan A, 200 out of 600 people will definitely be saved. In Plan B, there's a 1/3 chance all 600 people will be saved, and a 2/3 chance that no one will be. Statistically, these outcomes are equal. But most people go with Plan A. Why? Because the idea of definitely saving 200 people feels like a sure win. It gives us emotional closure. Pseudocertainty. Now flip the framing. Same disease, same numbers. But now you're told in Plan A, 400 people will definitely die. In Plan B, there's a 1/3 chance no one dies and a 2/3 chance all 600 die. Suddenly, people start picking Plan B, even though the odds haven't changed. Why? Because when certainty feels negative, we avoid it. And when risk is framed as a potential escape from that negative outcome, we chase it. That's the dark side of this effect. Certainty, even fake certainty, feels good when it's positive and awful when it's negative. So our decisions start swinging wildly based on how things are worded, not based on logic, based on emotional safety. You see this in real life all the time. Ever buy an extended warranty or insurance you didn't really need? That's the pseudo-certainty effect. You're not reacting to real numbers. You're reacting to the comfort of having protected yourself from uncertainty. Even if the risk is tiny, even if you're probably losing money, you buy certainty, or at least the feeling of it. It happens in business too. People will choose guaranteed short-term results over long-term upside, just because one feels stable and the other feels like a gamble. Even when the long-term option is smarter, we sacrifice future gains for immediate peace of mind. And politicians, they use this effect like a weapon. They present complex issues as black and white. They say, if we do this, we'll definitely be safer. Or, if we don't act now, we'll definitely lose everything. It's not about truth. It's about creating the illusion that uncertainty has been removed. Because the moment people feel like something is guaranteed, they stop asking questions. Here's the core truth behind the pseudo-certainty effect. We don't hate risk. We hate unclear risk. If a risk is clean, measurable, and fully explained, we can tolerate it. But when it's vague, messy, or unknown, we get uncomfortable, and we'll grab onto anything that makes it feel more stable, even if it's not. This is how marketing hooks you. You're not just sold a product. You're sold emotional safety. That toothpaste guarantees you whiter teeth. That app promises you more focus. That workout plan ensures results in 30 days. No disclaimers, no probabilities, just clean, comforting certainty. Even if it's fake. And it works. Because when your brain is overwhelmed by too many variables, it starts searching for relief, for closure. So when someone offers that relief, when they present one part of the problem as handled, you grab onto it. You focus only on the certain part and ignore the rest. You simplify the decision, even if it costs you in the long run. But here's the scary part, you don't realize you're doing it. That's why this effect is so powerful. It doesn't feel like bias. It feels like being smart. It feels like choosing safety. But really, it's a shortcut, a mental hack. And once you see it, you start noticing it everywhere. So how do you fight it? You slow down. You ask, what part of this situation is actually certain? Is that feeling of safety based on facts, or just how it was framed? You zoom out. Look at the entire risk, not just the part someone's trying to make you feel good about. Because a lot of times, what feels like the safe option is just the most emotionally satisfying option. Not the best one. You also learn to get more comfortable with uncertainty. Not everything in life can be made clean or guaranteed. But that doesn't mean the uncertain path is always worse. Sometimes it's where the real growth is, the better outcomes, the bigger wins. But if you always chase the illusion of safety, you'll miss those. This effect doesn't just shape your choices, it shapes your whole mindset. It's the reason you stay in jobs you hate, relationships that don't serve you, routines that no longer grow you, because they feel certain, and your brain clings to that, even if you're losing something bigger. So next time you feel yourself leaning hard toward an option just because it feels safe, pause. Ask yourself if that safety is real, or if it's just a mirage, because when you stop confusing certainty with truth, your decisions start getting a whole lot smarter. That's the pseudo-certainty effect. Not about risk, not about logic, just the dangerous comfort of things that feel definite, even when they're not. The Affect Heuristic. You're standing in front of two vacation options. One is a charming little cottage by the sea. The brochure has golden sunsets, smiling couples, fresh seafood, everything that screams peace. The second one, a city escape with historical sights, but the images look cold, gray, maybe a little sterile. Guess which one most people choose? The one that feels better, even if the city trip is cheaper, safer, or more culturally enriching. Why? Because of the Affect Heuristic. This effect is like the invisible hand steering our decisions when we think we're being logical. But we're really not. The Affect Heuristic is when our brain swaps out a hard question like, what's the smartest option here? With an easier one, how do I feel about it? And whatever answer that emotion gives us, we trust it instantly. Let's say you hear the word nuclear energy. What comes up? For some people, it's danger, explosions, radioactive waste. For others, it's clean energy, innovation, a step toward the future. Same topic, wildly different emotional reactions. And guess what? Those reactions shape how we think about the risks and benefits. Not facts, not logic, just feelings. The Affect Heuristic is the reason we're terrified of flying, but we're totally fine driving a car, even though statistically, driving is way more dangerous. The plane crash feels scarier, so we rate it as riskier. That's not rational. That's emotional math, and your brain uses it all the time. Here's what's wild. When you like something, you automatically assume it's low risk and high reward. And when you dislike something, you assume it's dangerous, complicated, probably not worth it. Your emotions do the heavy lifting before your logic even wakes up. Take this to politics. If you already trust a certain leader, every policy they propose feels smart. It feels safe, even if you don't fully understand it. On the flip side, if a leader rubs you the wrong way, even their best ideas feel threatening. Because when emotion speaks, logic goes quiet. And advertisers, they've mastered this. Ever notice how commercials don't really explain the product anymore? They show you a lifestyle, a vibe, a feeling. Happy families, adventure, nostalgia, sex appeal. Why? Because if they can get you to feel good, you'll assume the product is good too. That's the shortcut. You don't need data if you've got dopamine. The Affect Heuristic isn't just powerful. It's fast. It kicks in instantly, before you even realize it. You get a gut feeling, and that feeling is the decision. Even if you pretend to analyze things afterward, you're often just trying to justify what you already felt. It happens in hiring, dating, investing, everywhere. A resume with a photo you like feels more competent. A person who reminds you of a favorite cousin seems more trustworthy. A company with cool branding must be successful. None of that is objective. It's emotional bias disguised as reason. And here's where it really messes with you. When risk is involved, the affect heuristic gets even stronger. If something feels scary, you overestimate how risky it actually is. If it feels exciting, you ignore the downsides completely. So fear leads to overprotection, and excitement leads to blind spots. Think about gambling. People aren't calculating odds. They're chasing a feeling. The rush, the thrill, the lights, the near misses. The whole environment is engineered to create positive emotional cues, and your brain eats it up. It starts saying, "This feels good, so it must be worth it," even when you're losing money. Same with extreme sports, startup investing, or falling for someone toxic. You're not asking, "Is this smart?" You're riding the emotional wave. You want the high. And that desire drowns out every red flag. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth. You can't turn this off. You're wired this way. Every human is. But what you can do is pause. When you catch yourself making a quick decision, ask, am I choosing this because it feels right or because it is right? That tiny pause can snap you out of the spell. Also, start noticing how your emotions color your judgment. If you're scared, your brain will shrink the upside and magnify the danger. If you're in love, you'll overlook flaws and leap without looking. That's not failure. That's being human. But if you don't see it happening, it controls you. The affect heuristic isn't the enemy. It's your emotional compass. And sometimes it points you in the right direction. Sometimes that gut feeling is wisdom, especially if it's built on experience. But you need to know when it's helpful and when it's hijacking your thinking. Because feelings lie. They lie all the time. Not because they're evil, but because they're fast, messy, reactive. And in a world full of complexity, your brain wants shortcuts, simplicity, certainty. So it says, let's not analyze this. Let's just feel our way through. Problem is, some of the biggest decisions in life, where to live, who to trust, when to walk away, require more than a gut check. They need reflection, nuance, honesty. But if you let the affect heuristic take the wheel every time, you'll always choose what feels safe, or exciting, or familiar, not what's actually best. So the next time you're sold on something, instantly pause. Ask yourself, what emotion is driving this? Is it fear, comfort, ego, excitement? And then ask, what would I decide if I took that emotion out of the picture for just 5 seconds? You might still go with your gut, but at least you'll know why. And that awareness, that's where real decision making starts. That's the affect heuristic, not just a bias, a powerful emotional engine. And if you don't learn how to drive it, it will drive you every time. Effort justification. You ever see someone go through absolute hell just to get something? Barely sleep, pour in months of work, spend money they don't have, and then finally, when they get it, they say it was all worth it. Even if the thing they got isn't that great. That's not just pride talking. That's effort justification, a psychological bias that rewires your brain to love something more, simply because you had to struggle for it. It's wild. We're taught that hard work equals value. So the second we go through pain, sacrifice, or serious effort to get something, our minds rush in to protect that investment. If we don't love the outcome, our brains start changing the story. We convince ourselves the goal was worth it, just to avoid feeling like we wasted all that energy. It's not logic. It's self-preservation. There's this old experiment, simple but brutal. A group of college students were invited to join a discussion group. But to get in, they had to pass an initiation. One group went through something mild. The other group had to go through a highly uncomfortable, even embarrassing process. Afterwards, both groups listened to the exact same, incredibly boring discussion. And guess what? The ones who suffered to get in rated the discussion as way more interesting. Why? Because if they admitted it was boring, they'd have to face the fact that all that effort, all that discomfort, was for nothing. So instead of accepting the truth, they rewrote the meaning. This happens constantly in real life. Think about expensive colleges. Some people will defend their alma mater with their life, even if it didn't really deliver, because admitting the truth would feel like admitting they wasted 4 years and a mountain of debt. Same with elite clubs, fitness programs, internships, even relationships. If you bled for it, you're going to believe it mattered. And here's the thing. Sometimes the thing really is valuable. Sometimes the work does pay off. But the bias shows up strongest when it doesn't. When the result doesn't match the effort, that's when your brain starts bending reality. It adds value that may not actually exist, just to justify your struggle. It's why people defend hazing rituals. Why athletes idolize their coaches even if they were abusive. Why someone stays in a toxic relationship and says, "But we've been through so much together." It's not that the thing is good. It's that they suffered for it. And the suffering has to mean something, because meaning is the only thing that makes pain tolerable. Effort justification is basically your brain saying, if I went through this, it must be worth it. Otherwise, what was the point? And that's a terrifying question for most people. So instead, we inflate the outcome. We overrate the experience. We fall in love with things just because we bled for them. You see this in parenting too. Some parents impose harsh discipline, overschedule every minute, push their kids relentlessly. Then say, "Well, I turned out fine, so it must work." They don't question the damage, because that would mean questioning their own past. And nobody wants to feel like they suffered for no reason. Even brands use this. Ever buy a product that made you go through hoops just to use it? Maybe it took hours to set up, or the learning curve was steep. But once you figured it out, you loved it, even more than something easier and more user-friendly. Why? Because you earned it, and your brain doesn't let go of earned things easily. That's ownership through suffering. It's the IKA effect and effort justification teaming up. And get this, it even applies to ideas. If someone has fought for a belief, argued, sacrificed relationships, doubled down over and over, they're going to cling to that belief like it's gold. Not because it's true, but because they've suffered for it. Admitting they were wrong would unravel everything. Effort justification keeps people stuck in careers they hate, in identities that don't fit, in belief systems that no longer serve them, because admitting otherwise would mean admitting the suffering was wasted. And most people would rather double down than face that kind of emotional loss. But here's the hard truth. Just because you suffered for something doesn't mean it was worth it. That's not easy to hear. It's even harder to admit. But freedom starts with recognizing that effort doesn't automatically equal value. Sometimes the climb wasn't worth the view. And that's okay. What is worth it is learning from it, taking that struggle and turning it into wisdom, growth, clarity, because the goal isn't to justify your past. It's to build a future where your effort does lead to something meaningful, on purpose, not just in hindsight. So next time you find yourself fiercely defending something just because it was hard to get pause, ask yourself, do I actually love this? Or do I just not want to feel like I wasted my time? Because loving something for what it is, not just what it cost, is a much stronger kind of love. That's the effort justification effect. The more we sweat for something, the more we convince ourselves it matters, even when it might not. Self-reference effect. And ever wonder why you can forget someone's name 2 seconds after they say it, but you can remember a weird story about yourself from 2nd grade in crystal clear detail? That's not just nostalgia. That's the self-reference effect. Your brain is literally wired to hold on tighter to anything that connects back to you. See, most people think memory works like a filing cabinet. You hear something, you store it, and boom, it's there. But that's not how it works. Memory is emotional, personal, selective, and nothing lights up your brain faster than something that feels like it's about you. The self-reference effect is exactly what it sounds like when we tie new information to ourselves. Our experiences, our identity, our emotions. We remember it better, much better. It sticks. It doesn't just pass through the brain like trivia. It gets processed. It gets tagged as important. Here's how this shows up in real life. Let's say you're reading a list of random words. One group just reads them normally. The other group is asked to relate each word to themselves. Like, does this word describe you? Or, have you felt this recently? The second group almost always remembers more, not because they're smarter, just because their brains had something to anchor the words to, themselves. That personal connection acts like glue. It creates meaning, and meaning is the enemy of forgetfulness. Think about school. You probably forgot 90% of what was in your textbooks, but the stuff you could tie back to your own life, those were the lessons that stayed. Like when a history teacher compared a revolution to something happening in your neighborhood, or when a science concept reminded you of your own body, or your phone, or your habits. The second it became about you, it stopped feeling like homework and started feeling like truth. Marketers use this like a superpower. Good ads don't just show you a product. They paint a picture of you using it. They make you imagine your life with it. Better, cooler, easier. They get you thinking, that could be me. Because once you insert yourself into the image, the message becomes unforgettable. Social media runs on this effect too. That's why relatable content goes viral. It's not about how clever the post is. It's about how many people can see themselves in it. You scroll past 1,000 videos, but the one that hits, the one that feels like it was made for you, that's the one you send to 5 friends. That's the one your brain keeps thinking about hours later. It works in conversations too. Ever notice how when you're telling someone something, they're more likely to listen if you say, "This reminds me of something you told me," or "This is just like what you went through." That's because you just activated their self-schema. You made it personal, and now they're paying attention because their brain is going, "Hold up, this might be about us." But this isn't just about memory. It's also about persuasion. If you want someone to care about a message, don't just throw facts at them. Wrap those facts in something personal. Make it emotional. Make it relatable. Make it about them. That's how real change happens. People don't move because of raw data. They move because something inside them says, "This matters to me." The self-reference effect is why journaling works, why therapy works, Why writing down goals makes them feel more real. Because you're not just thinking about something, you're tying it to who you are. And once that happens, your brain treats it differently. It doesn't just pass through, it takes root. Even when we're trying to understand others, we use ourselves as a filter. You hear someone's story, and your first instinct is to say, "What would I do in that situation?" That's the lens we can't turn off. We interpret everything through our own history, our own identity, our own emotions. And while that's sometimes selfish, it's also very human. Now, here's where it gets powerful. If you know this effect exists, you can start using it intentionally. Trying to remember something. Ask how it connects to your life. How does this fact reflect you? What does it remind you of in your own experience? The more links you build, the harder it is for your brain to drop it. Trying to teach something. Don't just explain it. Tie it to your audience's life. Say, "You've probably experienced this." Or, "Imagine if this happened to you." Make it personal, and you turn a concept into a mirror. Trying to connect with someone. Make them the center of the story. The more you frame the conversation around them, their emotions, their memories, their struggles, the more likely they are to listen, remember, and respond. Because now it's not just talk, it's relevance. But there's a catch. This effect also means we sometimes ignore things that don't feel personal. That's why some people tune out issues that don't affect them directly. They don't feel connected, so they don't retain the information. Which means empathy, real empathy, requires you to simulate personal relevance. To imagine yourself in someone else's shoes, not just think about them, feel like them. That's how you overcome the blind spots this bias creates. The self-reference effect can trap us in our own bubbles. But if we use it right, it can also pull us out of them. It can help us remember, understand, and connect in deeper, more meaningful ways. Because in the end, the stuff that sticks with us, the stuff that changes us, is never random. It's the stuff we recognize ourselves in. The stuff that feels like it was made just for us. That's what the brain holds on to. That's what becomes unforgettable. That's the self-reference effect. Make it about you, and it'll never leave you. Moral credential effect. Ever hold the door open for someone, and then cut someone off in traffic 5 minutes later without a second thought? That's the moral credential effect. And trust me, it's sneakier than it sounds. It's what happens when you do something good, kind, generous, moral, and your brain caches that act in like a permission slip. Suddenly, you feel licensed to do something not so good right after. You gave to charity. You're allowed to treat yourself. You stood up for someone. You don't have to recycle today. You voted for the right candidate. Then you can say something a little questionable and still feel like a good person. This isn't about being a bad human. This is about how the mind plays defense. You want to believe you're moral, ethical, decent. But when you build up enough of that moral credit, your brain relaxes. It lets its guard down. And in comes the selfish move, the harsh comment, the tiny ethical corner you're suddenly okay cutting. Because, hey, you've earned it. The weirdest part. We don't even see it happening. We think our moral compass is locked in. But it drifts. Subtly. Especially when we've already proven, to ourselves or others, that we're one of the good ones. Here's a perfect example. In studies, people who endorse diversity in a hiring decision, like choosing a candidate of color or a woman, are more likely to make a biased decision right afterward. not because they suddenly became prejudiced, but because they feel like they've shown they're not. That credential protects their self-image, so they lower their defenses, and bias slips in through the back door. Same goes for consumers. People who buy eco-friendly products are statistically more likely to cheat or steal right after. Sounds ridiculous, right? But it makes emotional sense. Their brain thinks, I just did something virtuous, so this next thing, it's fine. It doesn't change who I am. That moral high gives them wiggle room. We do this with food too. You eat a salad for lunch, so you feel justified ordering dessert after dinner. Not because you're actually balancing calories, but because you feel like a person who makes healthy choices. That identity gives you permission to break the rule, just this once. This is the moral credential effect in action. It's not logical, it's narrative-based. You create a mental story about who you are: generous, tolerant, disciplined, honest. And when that story feels solid enough, you allow little contradictions to sneak in without damaging the image. And yes, it's tied to ego. When you see yourself as a moral person, you protect that image like it's your baby. The problem is, you start thinking the image alone is enough, that the reputation of being good can cover for a few bad actions. So when you slip up, you don't feel guilt. You feel entitled. This shows up in relationships too. You go out of your way for your partner all week. Acts of service, thoughtful texts, little surprises. Then Saturday comes around, and you're cold, distracted, maybe even a little rude. Why? Because you feel like you put in your emotional dues. You bought your moral license, and now you're spending it. This doesn't make you evil. It makes you human. Your brain is trying to manage balance. It keeps score. The problem is, it keeps a very biased score, one that favors your ego, one that turns isolated good deeds into moral immunity. The real danger. You stop checking yourself. You stop questioning your actions, because the past good thing becomes a shield. You say, I'm not that kind of person, and use that as proof, even when your behavior says otherwise. And it's not just individuals. Whole organizations fall into this trap. A company donates a chunk of profit to a cause, then turns around and exploits workers or cuts corners on sustainability. But they parade the donation like a gold star, and we let them, because we want to believe in moral credentials. It's comforting to think good cancels out bad. That if someone's heart is mostly in the right place, the rest doesn't matter as much. But here's the hard truth: morality isn't a bank account. You can't save up good deeds and withdraw bad ones without consequence. It doesn't work like that. Being good once doesn't make you good forever. And feeling like a good person, that can actually blind you to when you're not acting like one. So how do you fight this? Awareness. You have to catch the narrative forming. You have to ask, am I doing this because it's right, or because I think I already earned the right to bend the rules? You need to stay morally humble. Remind yourself that every action counts, not just the ones you're proud of. That character isn't something you prove once and then carry like a trophy. It's something you show in the tiny decisions, especially when no one's watching. And if you do slip up, and you will, don't justify it with past virtue. Own it. Correct it. Don't let your brain turn, I'm a good person, into, so I can get away with this. Because once you start believing that, you're already halfway to doing it again. That's the moral credential effect. Doing one good thing doesn't give you permission to do a bad one, but your brain will try to convince you otherwise. Every single time. The volunteer's dilemma. You ever see someone drop their phone on the subway, or trip in public, or sit crying on a bench, and no one helps? Not because people are cold. Not because they don't care, but because everyone's waiting. Just watching. Hoping someone else will step up first. That's the volunteer's dilemma. It's one of the strangest flaws in human behavior. A bunch of people can all want the same good thing to happen, but no one actually does anything. Because the cost of acting feels too personal, too risky, too inconvenient. So they freeze. Not because they don't want to help, but because they're secretly hoping someone else will carry the burden. The logic sounds like this. If someone's going to solve it, why should it be me? It's not always selfish. Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes it's embarrassment. Sometimes it's just doubt. You think, maybe I'll look stupid. Maybe I'll make it worse. Or you assume someone else is more qualified, more confident, more responsible. But here's the twist. Everyone else is thinking the same thing. That's why it's called a dilemma. Because acting costs you something: time, energy, risk. But if no one acts, everyone suffers. The good outcome vanishes. Not because it was impossible, but because everyone assumed someone else would take the hit. This plays out in the real world all the time. Think about group projects. There's always that moment when the work is sitting there and everyone's just sort of quiet. You're hoping someone else will take the lead, volunteer to do the research, or write the intro. And if nobody does, the whole thing sinks. Or someone scrambles last minute and burns out doing all the work alone. Now scale that up. You've got climate change, public safety, education reform, massive issues, and millions of people care. But most are sitting back, waiting for someone else to be the activist, the leader, the one who sacrifices comfort or time or money. And when everyone waits, nothing happens. Even in emergencies, the volunteer's dilemma kicks in. A famous case in a crowded neighborhood. A woman named Kitty Genovese was attacked while dozens of neighbors reportedly heard or saw parts of the incident. No one intervened in time. Everyone assumed someone else had called for help. It's known now as a tragic example of collective inaction, where everyone expected someone to act, but no one wanted to be the first. And this isn't just about tragedy. It happens in small, everyday ways. The dishes in a shared sink, the trash in a public park, that coworker clearly struggling with a task. You look around, you think, surely someone will take care of it. But if you're thinking it, so is everyone else. Because the price of volunteering feels personal, while the benefit feels collective. You take the hit, and they benefit. And that imbalance can make people hesitate. There's a deeper psychology here too. Risk aversion. Volunteering often means stepping out of line, going first, or standing alone. And evolution trained us to fear those things. Standing out from the group used to mean danger. Now it just means social risk, but our brains still resist it. We're social animals. We follow cues. And if everyone's standing still, looking around, unsure, that becomes the norm. Inaction becomes contagious. But here's what people forget. The person who moves first changes the entire group. They set the tone. They give permission. The second someone breaks the silence, stands up, speaks up, does something, the dilemma starts to collapse. Others follow, because now the fear of being the only one is gone. That's all it takes. One person. The first volunteer always carries the weight, but they also carry the power. This is why leadership isn't about titles. It's about initiative. About being the one who says, yeah, I'll do it, even if no one else does. Not because you're better, but because you refuse to wait. And look, it's easy to criticize the group from the outside. But when you're in it, it's harder. You don't want to overstep. You don't want to make a scene. You don't want to get it wrong. But if the stakes are real, if something truly matters, it's better to act and be awkward than stay still and be safe. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have the answers. You just have to care enough to move first. Sometimes that means speaking up in a meeting. Sometimes it means checking on someone who looks off. Sometimes it means organizing the thing no one else wants to deal with. You don't do it because it's easy. You do it because somebody has to, and maybe that somebody is you. Because the moment you act, the volunteer's dilemma flips. The group sees movement. And humans, we mirror movement. We mirror courage. One person doing the right thing makes it safer for everyone else to join in. That's the secret. You don't need to be a hero. You just need to break the silence. That's the volunteer's dilemma. Everyone wants the outcome, but no one wants the cost. Until one person decides the cost is worth it. And when that person shows up, everything can change. The spotlight versus illusion of transparency conflict. You walk into a room slightly late. Your shirt feels a little wrinkled. You're pretty sure everyone just saw you trip on the doorway. Your brain screams, everyone noticed. They're all judging. That awkward stumble, burned into their memory forever. But here's the truth, nobody cared. Nobody noticed. Or if they did, they forgot 10 seconds later. That's the spotlight effect. Your brain's overconfidence that all eyes are on you, all the time. But here's the twist. At the exact same moment, you're convinced everyone's watching your every move. You're also dealing with the illusion of transparency. That's the false belief that people can read your thoughts, feel your emotions, and totally get what you're experiencing, when they absolutely don't. These two illusions crash into each other constantly, and together they create a weird, exhausting contradiction. You feel hypervisible, like the star of a show, but also wildly misunderstood, like no one gets what you're really feeling. It's a mental conflict we all live in. Spotlight on the outside, fog on the inside. Let's break it down. The spotlight effect is that voice in your head telling you everyone's paying attention to how you look, what you said, how you laughed, what you wore. You think people replay your awkward moments the way you do. But the truth, people are too busy starring in their own movie to be extras in yours. They're not analyzing your every move. They're worried about their own. There was even a study participants were made to wear an embarrassing T-shirt, a huge picture of Barry Manilow. Then they had to walk into a room full of strangers. When asked how many people noticed their shirt, participants guessed over 50%. Reality. Less than 25% even remembered the shirt. Why? Because no one's paying attention like we think they are. Meanwhile, the illusion of transparency is quietly doing the opposite. You're nervous in a meeting, and you're convinced everyone can see your anxiety. You're sad at a party, and assume your mood is obvious. You're hiding anger during a conversation, and think it's leaking out of your pores. But it's not. People can't read you nearly as well as you assume. Most of the time, they have no idea what's going on behind your eyes. That's the paradox. You think people notice everything about you, but you also think they understand everything about you. And both are wrong. We live in our own heads so intensely that we forget how little access other people have. You're the only one hearing your internal monologue, the only one feeling your heartbeat, the only one interpreting your subtle expressions. Everyone else is just guessing. This mix of illusions shows up everywhere. In relationships, you think your partner should know what's wrong without you saying it. That if you're upset or distant, it's obvious. But from their perspective, maybe you just seem tired or quiet. They don't see the full emotional backstory running in your head, so you don't communicate because you assume it's clear. And when they don't respond how you hoped, you feel ignored. That's the illusion of transparency tricking you into believing silence is still communication. Same goes for public speaking. You feel your hands shaking, your breath hitching. You know you sound nervous, but the audience, most of them can't tell. They don't feel your adrenaline. They hear your words, not your panic. And if you mess up a sentence, they move on. You're the only one who replays it 100 times. But here's where it gets really interesting. When both effects hit at once, let's say you're giving a presentation. You think every eye is on your outfit, your posture, your nervous tick. You also assume everyone can sense how insecure you feel. The result, massive self-consciousness. You shrink, you stumble, you disengage. But the crowd, they're mostly half listening, thinking about lunch, or wondering if their phone is on silent. You are living a nightmare they're not even watching. So why do our brains do this? It's ego. Not in a selfish way, just in a self-focused way. We're the center of our own attention all day, every day. So it feels natural to believe we're the center of everyone else's, too. It's a survival instinct. Constantly scanning for judgment, constantly assuming exposure. But in today's world, it just fuels anxiety. And it cuts both ways. Because while we overestimate how much people judge us, we underestimate how much we need to express ourselves clearly. We think people get our tone, our meaning, our feelings, without us having to spell them out. But they don't. They can't. Not unless we tell them. So how do you fix it? First, realize the spotlight is mostly in your head. People aren't zooming in on you with high-definition cameras. Most of the time, they're too busy worrying about themselves to care what you said weirdly 3 hours ago. Second, stop assuming people know what you feel or need. Be specific. Be honest. If something matters, say it. If something hurts, share it. Clear communication beats invisible expectation every single time. This shift is powerful. When you accept that people notice you less than you fear, but understand you less than you think, it frees you. You get to relax the performance. You get to take things less personally. You get to explain more clearly. And suddenly, life becomes less about being seen and more about being known. That's the spotlight versus illusion of transparency conflict. You think people are watching and understanding, but they're mostly guessing, just like you are. The Ostrich Effect. You know that feeling when you know something's wrong, but you just don't want to deal with it. You avoid checking your bank account after a shopping spree. You skip the doctor's appointment even though the symptoms haven't gone away. You ignore the unread email with the subject line that screams urgent. That right there is the ostrich effect, and it is way more common than you think. It's named after the idea that ostriches bury their heads in the sand to avoid danger, which, by the way, they don't actually do, but humans basically do. We avoid looking at anything that might cause emotional discomfort, especially when the truth might force us to act, change, or feel bad about ourselves. So what do? We pretend it's not there. We convince ourselves that no news is good news, that avoiding the results means avoiding the problem, that staying blind is somehow safer than facing it. And in the short term, it feels better, like a relief, like taking your foot off the gas right before the car crashes, but somehow still believing the crash won't happen. The thing is, your brain is not wired for constant confrontation. It wants relief. So when it senses stress, financial, emotional, medical, it often defaults to avoidance. Not because you're lazy or irresponsible, but because it thinks avoiding the pain now is better than facing it and risking emotional overload. This is exactly why people delay opening bills, why they ghost messages that feel too serious, why they put off test results, therapy, budget planning, difficult conversations. Because once you open that door, you can't unknow what's behind it. But here's the psychological kicker. Avoiding the truth doesn't reduce the problem. It often amplifies it. Studies show that when people are faced with threatening information, say, about their health or finances, they often go out of their way to avoid it. Not just passively ignore it, but actively block it out. Even when it's critical, even when it's potentially life-saving. People have been known to skip cancer screenings just because they're afraid of a possible diagnosis. Not because they don't care, but because they're terrified of the emotional fallout. It's a defense mechanism. Avoid the knowledge, avoid the anxiety. But this creates a strange contradiction the more serious the issue, the more we avoid it, even though that's exactly when we need to face it the most. Let's take finances. You spend a little more than you should. You tell yourself it's just a one-time thing. Then the bill shows up, and instead of facing the number, you swipe it away. Ignore the app. Leave the envelope sealed on the table. And now, because you avoided it, you've added late fees. Your credit score drops. The problem multiplies while you look the other way. Health, same story. Something hurts. You tell yourself it'll go away. Deep down, a part of you knows it might not, but making the appointment feels too real, like confirmation of a worst-case scenario. So you wait, and wait, until something small becomes something unmanageable. This is the Ostrich Effect in full swing. Short-term comfort at the cost of long-term peace. Even in relationships, we do it. You feel distance, tension, something unspoken. But you avoid the talk. You hope it just blows over. Because if you bring it up, then it's real. Then you have to deal with feelings, uncertainty, maybe even conflict. So you pretend not to notice. You stay busy, distracted, anything but present. And here's the wild part. Your brain will rationalize the avoidance. It'll say, "You're just not in the mood right now," or "It's probably nothing," or "You'll deal with it tomorrow." But those tomorrows pile up, and eventually, the issue you avoided becomes the crisis you can't escape. There's also a strange guilt loop that kicks in. You feel guilty for avoiding the problem, so you avoid it more, because facing it now means admitting you've been running from it. So it snowballs. Denial turns into dread, and dread turns into paralysis. But there's another side to this. The moment you do face the thing, the bill, the result, the conversation, you take back control. You may not fix everything instantly, but you go from powerless to empowered, from reactive to proactive, because at least now you know. That's the irony. Avoidance feels like control, but it's actually surrender. Awareness, even when painful, is the start of actual freedom. So what do? Start small. Rip off one bandage at a time. Open the message. Check the number. Schedule the test. Have the talk. Don't try to fix the whole mountain. Just move one rock. And remind yourself fear comes from uncertainty. But clarity, even when it's uncomfortable, is never your enemy. Reality isn't the thing to run from. It's the only place you can actually solve problems. The ostrich effect is sneaky. It whispers, "You'll be fine if you just don't look." But the truth, what you don't look at ends up controlling you the most. So stop avoiding the thing. Face it, and you'll realize it wasn't as terrifying as your imagination made it out to be. Reactive devaluation. You ever hear a suggestion from someone you can't stand and immediately think, nope, not a chance. Doesn't even matter what they said. It could be a good idea, a smart idea, maybe even the right idea. But because it came from them, your brain slams the door shut. That's reactive devaluation. And it messes with your judgment more than you realize. It's not about logic. It's not about facts. It's about who the idea comes from. The second it's attached to a source you dislike, whether it's a person, a group, a political party, even a brand, your mind treats it as less valuable, less credible, less true, not because of the idea itself, but because your emotions have already cast their vote. And the wild part, this happens fast, instinctively. You don't pause to analyze the idea. You react, you devalue, you write it off before it even lands. Let's say you're in a heated argument with someone you've clashed with 100 times. You don't trust them. You don't like their tone. Maybe you think they're arrogant, and in the middle of the back and forth, they actually say something useful. Maybe a compromise, a solution, a middle ground. But instead of considering it, your mind flares up. You start thinking, they're just trying to manipulate me. This is a trick. They can't be right. You reject the idea because it came from them, not because it was wrong. That's how powerful this effect is. It blinds you to good ideas just because they're attached to the wrong name. Now apply this to politics. A politician you hate proposes a law, something that might actually benefit people, but you don't even want to hear the details. You assume it's corrupt, self-serving, wrong. You don't trust them, so you don't trust anything they touch. And here's where it gets even deeper. The same exact idea can be seen as smart or stupid depending solely on who says it. In one study, researchers gave participants a peace proposal in a simulated negotiation. Half the time, they were told it came from the opposing side. The other half, it was labeled as coming from their own group, same proposal, same words. But when people thought it came from the opposition, they rated it as less fair, less beneficial, and less trustworthy. Just because of the source. That's reactive devaluation in its rawest form. And it's not just other people who do this. You do it. We all do. You might ignore advice from a parent you resent, even if it's good advice. You might ignore feedback from a boss you dislike, even if it's spot on. You might shoot down an idea in a group project just because you've labeled one person as the weak link. In every one of those cases, you're not rejecting the content. You're reacting to the container. And it's dangerous. Because the more emotional history you have with someone, the more your judgment warps. You're not evaluating the present. You're reliving old battles. You're filtering new information through past resentment. And that creates gridlock. No progress, no growth, just automatic rejection. So what can you do about it? You have to start separating the message from the messenger. When you hear an idea from someone you don't trust, pause. Ask yourself, if someone else had said this, Someone I respect? Would I feel differently? That question alone can flip your entire reaction. It doesn't mean you suddenly trust the person. It just means you're giving the idea a fair shot. And here's another thing. This effect works in reverse too. If someone you love or admire suggests something, you might overvalue it. You give them too much credit. You trust too fast. You overlook red flags. That's how scams happen. That's how bad decisions get made. Not because people are dumb, but because we all anchor our judgment to the source instead of the actual content. So when someone you don't like says something that sounds halfway decent, pause. You don't have to agree. You don't have to trust. But ask yourself, is this a bad idea? Or do I just not like who it came from? Sometimes the answer will still be no, but sometimes that tiny moment of honesty lets a good idea slip through the cracks. And over time, that's how you become someone who's harder to manipulate, someone who doesn't throw away value just because it came in the wrong packaging. That's the trap of reactive devaluation. We assume the source defines the value, but if you can push past that instinct, even a little, you unlock a deeper kind of clarity, one that doesn't need to like someone in order to learn from them. Because the truth is, sometimes your enemy says something worth hearing, and the strongest move you can make is listening anyway. Terror management theory. There's a reason people get weirdly defensive when you challenge their beliefs. Not just annoyed, not just frustrated, but straight up emotionally charged. It goes deeper than pride, deeper than ego. It's wired into the survival part of your brain. It's called terror management theory, and it all starts with one unavoidable truth. We're all going to die. Now, most of us don't walk around actively thinking about death every second of the day, but it's always there, humming in the background like static. And when something makes that awareness rise to the surface, even slightly, we don't just feel fear. We grab hold of something familiar, something that makes us feel stable, safe, significant. That's when we cling to our beliefs, our values, our country, our religion, our politics, our in-group, anything that connects us to a sense of meaning and identity. Because if we can't escape death, we need to believe in something that makes life matter. That's the psychological engine behind terror management theory. When we're reminded of our mortality, even subtly, it triggers a kind of identity lockdown. We double down on the things that make us feel like we're part of something bigger, more lasting, more permanent than just a fragile body that eventually stops breathing. It sounds heavy, but you see it everywhere. Someone brings up a global tragedy, and suddenly people get louder about their worldview. A debate about culture or ethics turns ugly, not because the topic is offensive, but because it pokes at something deeper. It threatens a system of meaning that person is holding on to like a life raft. Even simple things, like seeing a funeral procession on the road or reading a headline about a celebrity death, can trigger this internal shift. We don't always notice it, but research shows that those small reminders of mortality often lead people to become more loyal to their group and more suspicious of outsiders. And it doesn't stop at beliefs. We also cling to status, to legacy, to achievements. Because if death is the end, then the next best thing is to leave something behind. Something that says, I was here, I mattered. That's why some people obsess over recognition, over building something with their name on it, over being remembered. Not just for vanity, but because deep down, it feels like a form of immortality. Terror management theory isn't about fear of how we die. It's about fear of not existing. The idea that someday this entire internal world, your memories, your personality, your relationships, just stops. That's a terrifying thought. So instead of sitting with that fear, we build stories about purpose, about afterlives, about good versus evil, about what's right and what's wrong. And once we build those stories, we defend them. That's why two people can hear the same fact and react completely differently. If a piece of information threatens their belief system, especially a belief tied to identity, their brain doesn't weigh it logically. It treats it like an attack, like a threat to their existence. That's what makes this effect so intense. Death isn't just something we fear physically. It's something we fight psychologically, all the time, without even realizing it. Think about what happened during the early stages of global crisis, wars, pandemics, terrorist attacks. People didn't just respond with fear. They responded by becoming more extreme in their beliefs, more tribal, more resistant to other perspectives. Because the brain says, I need something to hold on to, something that tells me I'm on the right side, that I'm good, that I belong, that I'm safe. Even hatred can come from that place. If someone threatens your worldview, and that worldview is helping you manage the fear of death, then that person isn't just disagreeing. They're endangering you emotionally. That's why people get so aggressively defensive over beliefs that seem unrelated to mortality. Because those beliefs are the scaffolding that holds up their sense of meaning. But here's the shift. Once you see this mechanism in action, you can start to loosen its grip. You can realize that disagreement doesn't mean annihilation. That letting go of a belief doesn't mean losing your identity. That other people's views aren't always a threat. Sometimes they're just different. And most importantly, you can start building meaning that doesn't come from clinging, but from creating. You don't need to hold tighter every time life feels uncertain. Sometimes the strongest move is letting yourself feel the uncertainty and choosing your values anyway. Terror management theory explains why we act the way we do when life reminds us of its limits. But once you become aware of it, you can start living from a place of intention instead of reaction. Death is real, but so is choice, and you don't have to cling to be free. The contrast effect: ever walk into a room, meet two people back to back, and instantly feel drawn to one over the other, even if you barely know them? That's not some random gut feeling. That's the contrast effect messing with your perception, quietly, automatically, and almost always without your permission. It works like this: your brain doesn't judge people, situations, or even yourself in isolation. It judges everything in comparison to whatever came right before. So if you meet someone who's awkward, disorganized, or not so impressive, and then immediately meet someone who's just decent, that second person is going to seem like a genius, like a total star. Not necessarily because they're amazing, but because your brain is still reacting to the first one. It's not logic, it's contrast. This effect shows up everywhere. In dating, a person looks way more attractive when they're standing next to someone you're not attracted to. In job interviews, a candidate can seem more competent just because they followed a weaker one. In shopping, a $20 item feels cheap after you're shown a $200 version, even if it's overpriced for what it is. Your brain is constantly calibrating reality based on what it just experienced. You're not reacting to what's in front of you. You're reacting to the difference between what's in front of you and what came before. And this messes with your judgment more than you think. Imagine you're house hunting. The first house you see is small, outdated, and overpriced. The second one is only slightly better. But suddenly it feels like a steal, like a breath of fresh air, because your brain isn't comparing it to the market. It's comparing it to the disaster you just walked through. That same house, if shown first, might have felt average, or even disappointing. That's the power of sequence. What comes before shapes how you feel about what comes next. And advertisers, they know this. They use it constantly. They'll show you the super deluxe premium version of something first. The $1,000 watch, the first-class seat, the all-inclusive luxury trip. So that by the time you see the mid-tier option, it feels reasonable. It's not cheap, but it doesn't feel expensive anymore. The actual value hasn't changed, just your perception of it. The contrast effect also hits hard in relationships. If you've just come out of something toxic or emotionally draining, the next person who treats you even slightly better can feel like a soulmate. Like the bar's been reset. Not because they're right for you, but because they're better than what you had. And that's dangerous, because it's not real evaluation. It's rebound thinking. Even in self-worth, we compare. You feel smart until you're in a room full of experts. You feel attractive until you scroll past 10 photoshopped models. You feel successful until someone else casually mentions their six-figure side hustle. Suddenly, your confidence dips. Not because anything about you changed, but because of what your brain just absorbed. That's the contrast effect hijacking your internal scale. And it works in reverse too. You might feel better about yourself if you're surrounded by people who seem less put together. It's not noble, but it's real. Humans have a reflexive need to measure themselves, and when there's no fixed standard, the context becomes the standard. Even teachers are affected. Studies have shown that if a teacher reads a poorly written paper right before a decent one, they're more likely to give the second one a higher grade than they would have otherwise. The paper didn't change. The grading environment did. So what do you do with this? First, start noticing the pattern. Ask yourself, am I evaluating this thing on its own merits, or am I reacting to what came right before it? Second, be careful of who or what you use as your benchmark. If you constantly compare yourself to highlight reels, social media illusions, or impossible standards, you're setting yourself up to feel small, no matter how well you're actually doing. Third, flip it. You can use the contrast effect to your advantage. If you're presenting something, an idea, a pitch, a product, lead with the thing you don't want people to choose. Set the contrast. Make what you do want stand out by what it follows. It's Persuasion 101, and it works because it taps into how brains are wired to judge. But most importantly, remember this: your judgment isn't as neutral as you think. Context matters, sequence matters, and the person you see, the decision you make, the thing you believe, might be totally different if it had come at a different moment. The contrast effect doesn't care about truth. It only cares about difference. So the next time something feels unusually great or unexpectedly awful, pause. Ask yourself, compared to what? That question alone can bring your thinking back to reality. Effort avoidance, cognitive miser theory. Have you ever sat down with a tough decision in front of you? Writing an important email, working on a challenging problem, even reading a dense article. And suddenly your brain starts whispering, maybe just check Instagram real quick. Or how about when you know you should research something before making a choice, but you watch another video instead because it feels easier? That's not laziness. It's biology. It's your brain acting as a cognitive miser. Your mind defaults to saving energy. It's designed to avoid mental effort whenever possible. Even when putting in the mental work could help you avoid mistakes, learn something new, or make a smarter decision, the brain is wired to conserve resources, glucose, attention, focus. And if a task doesn't feel urgent or rewarding, your instinct is to opt out. Think about it. Decision making, problem solving, critical thinking, all of these burn real energy. Evolution didn't give us unlimited mental fuel. Our ancestors needed to conserve it to survive. So when your brain detects complexity, uncertainty, or cognitive load, it hits cheat mode, shortcut mode. It looks for simpler patterns, habits, or existing biases that feel safe and quick, which is why you hit buy now instead of comparing options, or act on a headline instead of reading the full story, or judge someone's character after one interaction instead of asking questions. Those snap judgments feel satisfying and fast. They hurt less than the effort of exploring uncertainty, facing your own ignorance, or delaying gratification. And here's the catch. You usually don't realize it's happening. Your brain doesn't flash a warning, hey, you're taking a mental shortcut. Instead, it makes the decision feel like the right call. You tell yourself you're busy. You convinced yourself the information isn't important. You said it would just be better later. But every time you give in, you train the brain to value avoidance over clarity. This is why the same person who admires knowledge will binge snack videos. Someone who says they want to level up will skip the hard part. A person who believes in self-improvement will still avoid the one uncomfortable conversation, the one complex subject, the one goal that requires unpacking. Your sophisticated ideals don't override the brain's hunger for efficiency. But the interesting part is, it's also a choice. The brain isn't trapped in miser mode forever. You can override it. You can say, I see you. I see the shortcut. And for a moment, you offer effort permission to exist. You tell yourself it's okay to dig deeper, to sit with complexity, to delay gratification, to feel uncomfortable, because that's where growth happens. That's where decisions become conscious. When you deliberately override the cognitive miser, new things happen. You notice nuance. You question biases. You build muscle for deeper thinking. You catch assumptions before they become mistakes. Maybe you choose the article over the headline. Maybe you ask smarter questions instead of waiting for someone else to answer. Maybe you write that email before checking your phone. Maybe you dive into a book instead of doom scrolling. Each moment of pushback rewires your brain toward effort rather than away from it. And it's not about heroically thinking all day. It's about awareness. It's about noticing when your brain offers the easy way out, then gently guiding it toward the path that gets you what you actually want. Because easy often means comfortable, but rarely means growth. So here's the simple strategy: track your resistance. Notice when you feel bored, tired, or apathetic, especially if you should be focusing. That feeling isn't just fatigue. It's a signal your brain is choosing low cost over high value. Then ask a question. What if I just do this one time anyway? Your brain will protest. It will find distractions. That's how you know it's working. If it were easy, everyone would do it. But when you push through, even a little, you build momentum. You build trust in your ability to think. And next time, the resistance gets a little weaker. Because effort isn't just what your brain avoids. It's what separates thinking from surface living. It's what distinguishes depth from shallowness. And every time you choose effort, you're giving your brain permission to live up to your ideals instead of your impulses. So sure, your brain might always instinctively avoid effort. You're hardwired that way. But you don't have to let it. In fact, you can train it to lean into the work instead of away from it. And that's how you go from scrolling through distractions to building something meaningful. From reacting to reflecting. From being a consumer of decisions to being a maker of them. Your brain will thank you, now and months down the road, because the real cost of effort avoidance isn't in that moment. It's in everything you don't learn, build, and become, exactly because you chose comfort over challenge. That's the cognitive miser effect. Your brain is wired to avoid effort, but you can outthink it. The Goodhart Effect. You ever notice how the second something becomes the goal, it starts to get weird, like in school? The moment test scores become the main focus, the actual learning takes a back seat. Or at work, when the metric is all that matters, people start playing the game, bending the rules, hitting the numbers, while completely missing the point. That's not a fluke. That's not bad management. That's a psychological law, and it has a name. The Goodhart Effect. It basically says, when a measure becomes a target, it stops being a good measure. It's like once people start aiming for the number loses its meaning. It no longer tells you what you thought it did. You start getting distortion, manipulation, even outright lies, all in the name of hitting the goal. Here's where this gets wild. The original purpose of the measure was probably good. It was supposed to reflect progress. It was a signal. But as soon as that signal becomes the only thing people care about, the entire system warps around it. It becomes a game of optics instead of outcomes. Think about this in real life. A school wants to improve education. Makes sense. So they say, let's track test scores. Totally reasonable. But the second funding, rankings, and jobs get tied to those scores. Now everything shifts. Teachers start teaching to the test. Critical thinking disappears. Rote memorization takes over. And ironically, the thing they cared about, real learning, gets worse because the measure became the mission. Or go corporate. A company says, let's measure productivity by the number of emails sent, or projects completed, or hours logged. Simple, right? But the moment that number becomes the scoreboard, people stop focusing on quality. They pad their output, send pointless emails, create half-baked projects, stay online longer than needed just to be seen, and suddenly the numbers are up. But the value is down. The measure got gamed. It no longer tells the truth. And then you've got the world of content and algorithms. A platform decides to reward watch time or clicks. Sounds logical. But creators catch on fast. They start building content designed to exploit the algorithm instead of serve the audience. Clickbait, loops, rage bait, controversy. Because if the goal is minutes watched, then depth and integrity get sacrificed on the altar of retention. This effect doesn't just break systems. It breaks trust, because the people inside the system feel the pressure. They know they're being watched, judged, ranked. Not on the real thing, but on some number that doesn't capture the full story. And that pressure makes people behave differently, sometimes unethically, sometimes just robotically. Either way, the soul starts to leave the work. And here's the really tricky part. It feels like progress. The chart is going up. The numbers are clean. The dashboard says success. But underneath, people are burnt out. Corners are being cut. The purpose has been lost. And no one's asking, are we measuring the right thing? That's the Goodhart Effect in full force. And it's not about bad intentions. It's not about lazy people. It's about the psychology of incentives. When humans are told this is what matters, they'll focus all their energy on hitting that target, even if it means ignoring everything else, especially if their job, their grade, their identity, or their paycheck is on the line. You can see it in health too. Say someone wants to get in shape, so they track calories. Great. But soon, they're obsessed with the number. They're ignoring how they feel, ignoring nutrition, ignoring balance. They're just chasing the metric. And ironically, they become less healthy trying to look healthy. The goal replaced the reason. So how do you fight this? First, recognize that not all metrics are evil, but all of them have limits. A number can hint at something real, but it is never the full picture. You need context. You need feedback. And most of all, you need honesty. Ask yourself, is this number helping me make better decisions, or just making me feel in control? Second, build in flexibility. Don't tie your entire strategy to one metric. Use multiple. Mix qualitative and quantitative. Talk to real people. Ask questions that cannot be answered by data alone. Because once you start seeing the human story underneath the numbers, you make better choices. And third, get comfortable with messiness. The most important things in life. Trust, growth, creativity, love, meaning, are not easily measured. They're fuzzy. They resist neat dashboards. But that doesn't make them less valuable. It just means you need to protect them from being flattened into something that can be tracked. The Goodhart Effect is everywhere. In schools, in companies, in tech, in health, even in your own self-discipline. And it's dangerous because it hides behind the illusion of progress. It makes us feel like we're winning when we're actually drifting. But if you can stay aware, if you can hold on to the why behind the numbers, then the system doesn't control you. You control the system. You stop chasing the target, and you start chasing the truth. System justification theory. Ever wonder why people stay loyal to systems that clearly don't serve them? Like workers defending companies that underpay them, or citizens making excuses for governments that barely protect them, or people clinging to traditions that actively limit their freedom. It doesn't make logical sense. But it does make psychological sense, and that's where system justification theory hits hard. This one cuts deep, because it reveals a strange truth about human behavior. We don't just tolerate unfair systems. We defend them, even when they hurt us, even when we know they're broken. Why? Because deep down, we crave order more than fairness, stability more than change, certainty more than freedom, and we'd rather feel safe in a bad system than feel lost in an unknown one. Let that sink in. The mind has a survival instinct, and part of that instinct is to believe that the world makes sense, that it's mostly fair, that the structure around us is at least somewhat justified. Because if it's not, then what are we even standing on? If the system is a lie, then everything we've built on top of it starts to crumble. So to avoid that chaos, we convince ourselves that the system must be right, even if it clearly isn't. System justification is like a mental defense mechanism. It whispers, maybe this is just the way things are. Maybe it's not that bad. Maybe I'm overreacting. And once that thought settles in, it becomes easier to accept inequality, suffering, or dysfunction, not just around us, but within us. You see this in politics constantly. People voting against their own interests, defending the powerful while struggling themselves. Not because they don't see the injustice, but because they've been trained to believe that rocking the boat is more dangerous than staying in it. That if the system changes, it'll somehow be worse. So they side with familiarity, even if it's painful. And they're not crazy for doing it. That's the twisted part. Change threatens identity. People think, if the system is broken, and I've been part of it all along, then what does that say about me? What does that say about my choices? About my beliefs? So instead of questioning the system, they double down. It's psychological self-protection. You see it in workplaces too. Employees excusing toxic bosses, saying things like, well, at least they're direct, or they're tough because they care, even when it's obvious the environment is eating away at their health and self-worth. Why? Because challenging the system means challenging everything, and that's terrifying. The hierarchy, the structure, the flow of power, it all feels like the foundation, and if you pull at one thread, the whole thing might unravel. Even in relationships, this shows up. People justify mistreatment because change feels more threatening than misery. I know what I'm dealing with here becomes the internal logic. Better the devil you know than the unknown you don't. That's system justification digging its claws in, turning comfort into a cage. And it goes further. System justification shows up in how we internalize blame. Marginalized groups sometimes defend stereotypes that oppress them. Women explaining away sexism as just the way things are. Poor communities romanticizing struggle instead of demanding equity. People absorbing shame instead of questioning why they were made to feel ashamed in the first place. It's deep. And it's dangerous. Because it trains people to mistake obedience for wisdom, to mistake adaptation for peace, to believe that their suffering is somehow justified, that the system must be right, so they must be the problem. The system teaches us how to think, and then we defend it for doing so. And here's the twist: the more threatened people feel, the stronger this defense becomes. When society feels chaotic, people lean harder into tradition, into hierarchy, into the belief that the current way, even if broken, is better than no way at all. Insecurity fuels loyalty. Uncertainty fuels submission, and fear glues us to the very thing that's holding us back. So how do you escape this trap? You start by noticing it. That's the first crack in the wall. Ask yourself, am I defending this because I truly believe it's right? Or because I've been told it's the only way? Am I holding on to this structure because it serves me, or because I'm scared of what happens if I let go? Then you challenge your own comfort. Just because something is familiar doesn't make it right. Just because it's been this way doesn't mean it should stay this way. You have to be willing to feel the discomfort of uncertainty if you ever want to build something better. And finally, you look for the hidden narratives, the little stories that keep you stuck. Things like, I guess I'm just not good enough, or people like me don't get that kind of success. Those aren't truths. Those are scripts handed to you by systems that benefit from your silence. System justification is powerful, not because it's true, but because it feels safe. But safe isn't always honest, and comfort isn't always your friend. Sometimes, it's the voice that tells you to stay small, stay quiet, stay in your place. But you don't owe loyalty to a system that's failing you. You owe yourself the truth, even if it shakes the ground beneath you. The choice supportive bias. You know that weird feeling when you look back on a choice you made. A job, a relationship, even a product you bought. And even though it didn't turn out great, you still find ways to justify it. That's not just pride. That's not just stubbornness. That's something way deeper. It's called the choice supportive bias, and it affects you way more than you think. See, once we make a decision, especially a personal one, our brains get this quiet but powerful urge to protect it. Not because it was the best option, but because it was ours. We chose it. So now our mind starts rewriting the story to make it feel right. It downplays the negatives. It amplifies the positives. It fills in the gaps so the decision seems smart. Even if, in reality, it wasn't. It's the psychological version of don't look back. Because looking back honestly means admitting we were wrong. And the ego hates that. Let's take something simple. Say you bought an expensive phone. Right after buying it, maybe you noticed a few issues. The camera's not that great. The battery drains fast. But what do? You tell yourself, nah, it's still really fast. Or, the screen is amazing though. Or maybe, the updates are super secure. You're not being objective. You're emotionally defending your purchase. Because if you admit it was a bad one, you feel foolish. You feel regret. And that's the real enemy here. Regret. Regret is painful. It's uncomfortable. It lingers. So instead of facing it, the brain takes a shortcut. It rewrites the past to feel consistent with your present identity. You had to be right. You must have made the best choice available. Because if not, who are you now? Just someone who makes bad decisions. No, that's too messy. So the choice supportive bias swoops in to clean it up. This happens in relationships all the time. People stay loyal to partners who clearly weren't right for them. Not because they're blind to the red flags, but because admitting those red flags were always there feels like admitting they ignored them. Or worse, that they chose them. So what do? They reframe the past. They say, well, they had a lot of good qualities too. Or, it wasn't all bad. Or even, maybe I was the one who messed things up. You see how this works? The brain doesn't want a decision to feel like a mistake. So it edits the memory to feel more justified. You'll even see this in bigger life decisions, like career moves. Someone picks a college major, sticks with it for years, and even if they're miserable, they still tell themselves it was the right path, not because it was, but because the alternative is too heavy. Because switching now would mean admitting they've spent years going in the wrong direction. So instead, they rationalize. They say things like, it's stable though, or at least it pays the bills, or even, I'm just not passionate about anything else. The choice supportive bias doesn't need truth. It just needs emotional cover, and it's sneaky. Because it doesn't feel like bias. It feels like confidence, like conviction, like being sure of yourself. But that's the trap. Because confidence doesn't always mean correctness. Sometimes it just means you've been telling yourself the same story for so long that you've stopped questioning it. Think about how this shows up with identity. Say someone once chose a political stance, or a belief system, or a core value. Over time, even if the world changes, even if they change, they'll cling to that old decision like a lifeline. Not because it still fits, but because they made it. And changing it now would feel like betraying who they used to be. So they keep defending it. Not based on evidence, not based on logic, but based on a deep need to stay consistent with their past self. The truth is, we all like to think we're rational, that we weigh the pros and cons, that our choices reflect truth. But in reality, most of us are just doing damage control. We're managing the emotional aftermath of decisions we've already made, trying to make sure our past doesn't make us look like fools in the present. And you know what? That's human. This isn't about shame, it's about awareness. Because once you see the choice, supportive bias, you can start questioning it. You can pause before automatically defending a past choice. You can ask, am I just trying to protect my ego right now? Am I being honest about the outcome? Or am I just trying to make myself feel better about something I don't want to regret? Regret isn't the enemy. It's a teacher. It's a signal that you've grown, that you now see things you didn't see before. And if you never let yourself feel regret, you never get the full lesson. You just build layer after layer of fake comfort over something that might need to be re-examined. So maybe the boldest thing you can do is admit when a choice wasn't right for you, not because it makes you weak, but because it proves you're strong enough to change your mind, strong enough to evolve, strong enough to stop justifying the past and start creating a better future. The choice, supportive bias wants you to stay comfortable. But progress lives in discomfort. And if you're brave enough to stop rewriting the story, you might finally start living a better one. Affect Heuristic. Ever notice how something feels more valuable just because you know someone worked hard on it? It might not even be that impressive, but the second you realize someone put serious effort into making it, your brain suddenly bumps up its worth. That's not a coincidence. That's the Affect Heuristic kicking in, a mental shortcut where we judge things as better, more meaningful, or more worthy simply because we believe more effort went into them. This shows up everywhere. Someone gives you a handwritten letter. It's not poetic, it's not clever, but it feels deeper than a text. Why? Because you know they took time. They cared enough to sit down and actually write. That effort changes how you see it. Same message, different delivery, and yet it hits harder. Your brain thinks they tried. That must mean it's important. And it's not just personal stuff. Think about marketing. How many products slap words like handcrafted, made with care, or took years to develop onto their packaging? It's not just fluff. It's weaponized effort. Companies know you're more likely to trust and value something that seems like it took time, sweat, or struggle. It makes the product feel authentic, even if the result is no better than something mass-produced in half the time. The wild part is, this works even when the effort isn't real. A study once gave people identical paintings, one labeled as taking 20 hours to complete, the other supposedly finished in just 2 hours. People consistently rated the first one higher. Same exact image. But because they thought more effort went into it, they saw it as more valuable. Our brains aren't judging the outcome. They're judging the story behind it. This even messes with how we see people. If someone gives a clunky speech but clearly poured their heart into it, we admire them. If someone breezes through a presentation with no visible struggle, we respect them less. Even if they crushed it, because deep down we associate effort with sincerity, with care, with humanity. That visible grind makes things feel real. It plays out in relationships too. Someone plans a big, imperfect date, burns the food, forgets the wine, stumbles through a playlist, but you're still touched because you saw the effort. You felt the intention. Now flip it. Someone gives you something perfect but effortless. A prepackaged plan, something they threw money at, zero sweat involved. You might enjoy it, sure. But it probably won't hit the same. Emotionally, we just value what looks earned. And this gets personal fast. Because when you put in effort into a project, a conversation, a connection, and it's not appreciated, it hurts. Like, genuinely stings. You think, how could they not see how much I gave? That sting comes from the effort heuristic working in reverse. If we assume effort equals value, then someone ignoring that effort feels like they're ignoring us. But here's where things get dangerous. Sometimes we confuse effort with quality in ways that hurt us. Like when you spend hours on a task and convince yourself it must be great because it took so long, or when you pour years into a relationship and keep telling yourself it's worth saving. Not because it is, but because you've already sacrificed so much. That's the trap. We start believing that time and energy automatically mean something is right. This is how we end up stuck in jobs we hate, or defending decisions that clearly don't serve us, or clinging to beliefs that no longer align with who we are. Not because they're good, but because they were hard, and letting go would mean admitting all that effort didn't pay off. The effort heuristic makes that feel like failure, even when walking away is actually the smartest thing we could do. What's even trickier? It doesn't just affect how we judge others or decisions. It shapes how we judge ourselves. You work harder than ever on something and expect to feel proud. But if the results fall flat, your brain still tells you no, it has to be good. Look how hard you tried. It can't be bad. That's your ego teaming up with the effort heuristic to protect you from regret. But if you're not careful, you start overvaluing struggle for its own sake. We romanticize suffering. We wear exhaustion like a badge. We say things like no pain, no gain. And somewhere along the way, we forget that ease can be just as powerful. That effort doesn't always mean excellence. That struggling isn't the same thing as succeeding. The most dangerous part is when you start to think people can't see your worth unless they see your effort. That's a heavy way to live. That's how burnout starts. That's how resentment builds. Because the truth is, people won't always notice how hard you tried. They won't always reward it. And if your sense of value depends on being seen suffering, you'll keep suffering just to feel seen. But what if you let go of that? What if you stopped needing everything to be hard in order for it to matter? What if you believed something could be valuable even if it came naturally? Even if it felt easy? Even if it didn't leave you drained? That's not laziness. That's clarity. Effort can mean value. But it's not the only thing that does. Don't let your brain trick you into chasing pain just to feel like something's worth it. Sometimes, the best things in life are the ones that flow. That click. That land without forcing. So next time you find yourself overvaluing something just because it took time, or undervaluing something because it didn't, pause. Look at the result, not just the grind. Effort matters, but so does truth. And the truth is, not everything good has to hurt. Goal gradient effect. You ever come across something that just feels valuable? Not because it's impressive, not because it's rare, but because you know someone poured a ridiculous amount of effort into it. It could be a drawing, a birthday cake, a pair of handmade shoes. Maybe it's even kind of flawed, uneven, clunky. But somehow you care about it, you respect it, you value it more. That's not a coincidence. That's the effort heuristic doing its thing. This built-in mental shortcut where we assume more effort equals more value. And it's everywhere. Someone hands you a handwritten note. Short, kind of messy, maybe not even that deep. But it hits different. You feel something. Why? Because you see the effort. Your brain says, wow, they actually sat down, took time, and made this for me. Now imagine they just sent a quick text. Same words, totally different weight. No effort, no emotion. This even works when the quality doesn't change at all. A famous study once showed people two identical paintings. Same brushstrokes, same canvas. One was said to have taken 2 hours to make. The other, 20 hours. You already know what happened. People rated the 20-hour version as better, more creative, more beautiful, just because they thought it required more work. It's not about results. It's about the story our brain tells us when effort is involved. Think about restaurants. They'll describe food as hand-rolled, slow-roasted, crafted over 3 days. They're not just feeding you adjectives. They're selling effort. Same thing with artists, entrepreneurs, athletes. If you've ever watched someone struggle, persist, and grind toward a goal, even if they don't win, you probably still admire them more than the person who breezed through it effortlessly. Why? Because deep down, we equate effort with care, with meaning, with truth. When something costs someone time or energy, it feels earned. That taps into something primal. This shows up in relationships, too. Someone plans a date. It's chaotic. The food's cold. They forgot your favorite drink. But they tried. And that means something. Now compare that to someone who throws together a flawless plan, but puts zero thought into it. Just copied it off Pinterest and checked the boxes. It's technically better, but emotionally, it's hollow. Because it cost them nothing. And when you are the one putting in the effort, that's when this gets real. You work on a project for hours, maybe days. You give it your all, and then someone shrugs at it. Or worse, doesn't even notice. That hurts, not just because of pride, but because to your brain that effort was the value. When it goes unrecognized, it feels like you go unrecognized. Now here's where things get tricky. The effort heuristic isn't just a feel-good quirk. It messes with your decisions. Big time. Let's say you spent 3 years building a business that's going nowhere. Deep down, you know it's failing. But you keep going. Why? Because you already gave it so much. Your brain whispers, it can't be worthless. Look how hard you worked. And just like that, you start confusing effort with results. Or take relationships. You stay with someone who clearly doesn't value you. You tell yourself, I've given them everything. I can't walk away now. But maybe that's exactly why you should walk away. The effort doesn't make it worth saving. It just makes it harder to admit it's time to go. This is where the effort heuristic turns from helpful to harmful. It tricks you into overvaluing things that don't serve you anymore. It keeps you loyal to jobs, habits, even identities that should have been left behind. Not because they're right, but because they were hard. That's the real danger. Thinking that struggle is the same thing as significance. And let's be honest, we love to romanticize the grind. We worship hustle. We idolize people who work harder than everyone else. We wear burnout like a badge. Like exhaustion proves we're doing something meaningful. But does it? Or are we just addicted to effort because it makes us feel worthy? This doesn't just affect how we judge the world. It affects how we judge ourselves. You create something simple, but powerful. Deep down, you wonder, was it too easy? Should I have suffered more to make it count? That's the effort heuristic hijacking your worth. Sometimes the best things in life don't come from agony. They come from clarity, flow, ease. And we screw them up because we've been conditioned to believe value must be earned the hard way. Now don't get it twisted. Effort can be beautiful. It shows commitment. It builds character. But effort alone doesn't guarantee value. Sometimes we push too hard just to prove we care, just to be seen. And that's the part no one talks about. When you start believing people won't see your worth unless they see your struggle, you start creating your own suffering. You make things harder than they need to be, just to feel like they matter. But what if you didn't have to do that? What if ease was allowed? What if something could be beautiful without the blood, sweat, and tears? What if the thing you made in 30 minutes was just as valid as the one that took 30 days? Effort doesn't define worth, and it definitely doesn't define you. So yeah, respect the grind, appreciate the hustle. But don't get lost in the idea that something only has value if it broke you to create it. Sometimes, the thing that costs the least is worth the most. Affective forecasting error. Imagine spending years chasing something, a job, a relationship, a lifestyle, thinking it'll finally make you happy. You dream about it, plan your life around it, tell yourself, once I get there, everything will feel right. And then you get it. And it's fine, not magical, not terrible, just not what you pictured. That feeling, that disconnect, that's not just disappointment. That's affective forecasting error. It's this weird glitch in the way our brains predict future emotions. We're not just bad at knowing what will make us happy. We're consistently, wildly off. And it's not because we're irrational or lazy. It's because the brain is trying to simulate the future, using a very flawed map the present. You think winning the lottery will fix your life. You think fame will fill that empty space inside you. You think heartbreak will destroy you forever. And none of those things are fully true, because how you feel right now is shaping how you imagine you'll feel then. And real life doesn't work like that. Let's say you're single and lonely. You start believing that finding the one will make you happy every day. You'll finally feel complete, calm, grounded. But fast forward. You're in a relationship now, and yeah, it's good. But it didn't erase your stress. It didn't fix your mood swings. It didn't shut off that little voice in your head that says, I thought this would feel better than it does. That's the trap. You weren't wrong to want it. But your emotional forecast was wrong. You expected a permanent high. What you got was a Tuesday. The same thing happens with jobs, money, bodies, houses, followers. We picture this future version of ourselves glowing with happiness, confident, fulfilled, at peace. But that image is a highlight reel. It's not the daily grind. It's not the traffic, the awkward meetings, the chores, the emotional noise that never fully goes away. You can win the prize and still carry the same restless brain into the next chapter. One of the most famous studies on this was about college professors getting tenure. It's a huge moment. Years of pressure and performance all leading to one answer, yes or no. Everyone thinks getting tenure will skyrocket their happiness, and being denied will wreck them. But 6 months later, there was almost no difference between the two groups. The joy faded, the pain healed. Life moved on. And that's what most people forget: feelings move on. We overestimate how long happiness will last. We underestimate how fast pain fades, and we almost always forget how adaptable we are. Psychologists call this the hedonic treadmill. You get what you want, and then your brain resets the baseline. The dream car becomes just your car. The beach house becomes normal. The body you worked so hard for still has days where you hate how you look, because the brain doesn't stop wanting. It just shifts the target. So what does this mean? Are we doomed to always be disappointed? Is it all just a game of chasing feelings we'll never catch? Not exactly. It just means your emotions are more flexible than you think. You're not chasing happiness. You're chasing relief. But the problem is, most relief is temporary. It's like scratching an itch. Feels amazing until it doesn't. And then you're itching again. Here's where it gets deeper. We don't just mispredict how strong our emotions will be. We mispredict what will cause them. You assume the job title will make you proud. But it's actually the friendships at work that light you up. You think the expensive vacation will be unforgettable, but the best moment ends up being a stupid inside joke at a gas station on the way there. We're not good at knowing what future moments will matter, because meaning is subtle. It hides in small, boring places. And when we focus too hard on the big wins, the flashy goals, we miss the quiet joys that are already within reach. This doesn't mean you should stop setting goals, or stop dreaming, or stop wanting more. It just means check the story you're telling yourself. If you're miserable now, don't assume a future milestone will rescue you. If you're restless, don't pin all your hope on one external thing. Because even if you get it, the feeling you're craving may not come with it. Or it might show up and fade before you even realize it was there. The real move is to practice emotional honesty. Admit you don't know how future you will feel. Admit your brain might be wrong. That alone can change the way you chase things. And weirdly enough, the less pressure you put on that next big thing, the more joy you'll probably get from it. Because when you stop expecting something to complete you, you actually get to enjoy it for what it is, not as a fix, just as an experience, a chapter, a moment. We're not wired to predict our future feelings perfectly. That's okay. What matters is learning to notice the gap between what you thought would fulfill you and what actually does. And once you start noticing that, you stop running on autopilot. You stop chasing fantasies. And you start creating a life that feels real, not just impressive in your imagination. Because maybe the real win isn't getting everything you ever wanted. Maybe it's learning to understand how your own mind works, so you can finally stop lying to yourself about what will make you happy. The licensing effect. You ever do something good and immediately feel like you've earned the right to slack off a little? Like you go to the gym in the morning, and by lunch you're thinking, yeah, I deserve this entire pizza. Or maybe you donate a few dollars to charity, and then feel a little less guilty being rude to the waiter later that night. That weird mental trade off you just made. That's not random. That's called the licensing effect. Your brain's way of cashing in on your own morality. It goes like this. You do something virtuous, helpful, healthy, kind, something that fits your version of a good person. And without realizing it, that one good act gives you mental permission to break your own rules later. You gave. So now you get. You were strong. So now you can indulge. You were selfless. So now, it's okay to be selfish. This isn't just a glitch. It's a deeply rooted psychological pattern. And it's way more common than people realize. Picture this. You volunteer on a weekend. You help clean up a local park. You feel great. You feel proud. But that night, you snap at your roommate over something tiny. Or maybe you make a comment you know crosses a line. And instead of feeling that full sting of guilt, you feel justified. Because you already did your good deed for the day. Your moral balance feels settled. This happens with everything from shopping to politics to relationships. It's why someone who drives a hybrid might feel more okay buying clothes from unethical brands, or why a person who speaks out against injustice might still treat people like trash behind closed doors. They've built up moral credit. Now they feel licensed to spend it however they want. And no, this isn't just some toxic personality trait. This is human nature, backed by tons of research. In one study, people who took a multivitamin ended up making more reckless health decisions later, like eating junk food or skipping exercise. Not because the pill made them unhealthy, but because it made them feel like they were already covered. Their brain said, "Hey, you did the healthy thing. You're good." Same with morality. People who wrote about their past good deeds were actually more likely to lie or cheat in a task right after. Not because they turned evil, but because their inner scoreboard already showed them as being in the green. It's sneaky. It's automatic. And it explains why some of the most ethical people can also make the worst decisions, especially when no one's watching. But here's the scary part. The licensing effect doesn't just mess with individual behavior. It affects entire systems. Think about corporations. A company donates to a cause, makes a public statement, throws some money at a feel-good campaign, and then quietly keeps doing harm behind the scenes. But now they've bought moral credibility. They've done their good act. So scrutiny fades. People look away. The license worked. Or politics. A leader pushes through one policy that helps a certain group. Then they pass 3 more that quietly hurt others, but their supporters still see them as a good person because they remember the good deed. Their brain has logged that act as proof. So now, the red flags feel easier to ignore. That's how this plays out on a massive scale, not because people are evil, but because the brain is always keeping emotional score. And yeah, this happens in relationships too. You do something sweet for your partner. Plan a date, write a note, show up big in a tough moment. Then later, you lash out, shut down, stop communicating. And instead of owning it, your mind drags out the receipt like, "But remember what I did for you last week." You start using your past effort as a shield to excuse present behavior. That's the dark side of goodness. It becomes a currency, and once you've spent it, your conscience lets you bend. So what do you do about that? First, recognize when it's happening. The moment you hear yourself say, "I deserve this," or "I've earned it," ask, earned what exactly? Are you balancing your values? Or are you just giving yourself a hall pass because you did something that made you feel moral? Second, remember that being good isn't a one-time thing. It's not a badge. It's a process. One healthy meal doesn't make you fit. One apology doesn't make you kind. One generous act doesn't make you a saint. Morality isn't a checklist. It's a pattern of behavior. Over time, in different situations, when it's easy, and especially when it's not. And third, watch how you reward yourself. It's totally okay to enjoy balance, rest after work, pleasure after effort. But don't confuse relief with license. There's a big difference between treating yourself and letting your worst habits sneak through the back door disguised as self-care. The truth is, the licensing effect isn't evil. It's human. It's a coping mechanism. It helps us deal with guilt, shame, pressure, identity. But if you're not aware of it, it'll quietly convince you that your goodness gives you permission to stop being good. And once that belief takes hold, anything can be justified. So yeah, be proud of your values, live by them, but don't let them become a hall pass. Because sometimes, the worst choices come right after our best ones. The Backfire Effect. Have you ever tried to change someone's mind using facts, like actual hard evidence, a graph, a stat, a direct quote? You show it to them, calmly, logically, and instead of them going, "Wow, I didn't know that," they double down. They get louder, more defensive. Suddenly their belief is stronger than ever. And you're left sitting there thinking, how is this possible? That moment right there is not a failure of communication. That is the backfire effect in action. It's one of the most frustrating psychological patterns we deal with as humans. The more you challenge someone's belief, especially if that belief is tied to their identity, the more likely they are to dig in and reject the truth, even when it's sitting right in front of them. It should not work like this. You would think if a person sees their belief is wrong, they would update it. That's what we imagine a rational mind should do. But the brain does not like feeling wrong. It hates it. Being wrong feels like being under threat, and when the brain feels threatened, it doesn't open up. It locks down. Let's break this down. Imagine someone believes a conspiracy theory. You calmly show them that the evidence is fake. You walk them through the steps. You prove how the theory falls apart. And what happens? Do they thank you for enlightening them? No. They say things like, "That's exactly what they want you to think." Or "You're brainwashed by the media." Or worse, they accuse you of being part of the problem. What's happening here isn't ignorance. It's a psychological immune response. You've triggered a threat to their worldview, and the brain is now scrambling to defend itself. The backfire effect happens most often with beliefs that are emotional, deep, identity-based. If someone's belief is tied to their sense of morality, politics, religion, self-worth, or community, they will not let go of it just because of a few charts or statistics. In fact, new facts can actually make the belief stronger because they force the person to construct even more emotional defenses. They start stacking reasons, they build mental walls, they cherry-pick counterpoints, and all of it feels incredibly logical to them. But this doesn't just happen in extreme cases. It happens in daily life. A friend thinks their partner is perfect, even though you've seen them lie, cheat, or manipulate. You bring it up gently, and instead of reconsidering, your friend starts justifying. "You don't understand them like I do. You're jealous. They've changed." You're trying to help. But the more you try, the more resistance you feel. That's not just emotion. That's the backfire effect. Why? Because the belief isn't about logic. It's about comfort. The brain wants certainty. It wants to believe it understands the world. And when that picture is challenged, especially by someone else, it feels like an attack, a crack in the mirror. So it fixes the crack by doubling down on the belief. And here's the wild part. The smarter you are, the more likely you are to experience this. Because intelligence gives you the tools to defend your beliefs more creatively, to spin arguments, to gather information that supports your view and dismiss the rest. Being smart doesn't always make you more open-minded. It can just make you better at rationalizing. So how do you break through this? Well, first, don't assume facts will do the job. Facts help, but not on their own. What matters more is trust. If someone feels judged, they shut down. If they feel respected, even when you disagree, their mind stays a little more open. Second, ask questions instead of making statements. Let people walk themselves toward a new perspective instead of dragging them there. Something like, "What makes you feel so sure about that?" Or, "Have you ever had a moment where you doubted that?" Create space for curiosity, not defensiveness. Third, be aware of your own backfires. You're not immune. Nobody is. We all have beliefs that are rooted in emotion, not logic. And when they're challenged, our brains go into defense mode too. So if someone confronts you with an uncomfortable truth, notice your reaction. Are you rejecting it because it's false, or because it's threatening? The truth is, being wrong doesn't make you weak. Updating your mind is not failure. It's growth. But that only happens when the brain feels safe enough to change. And right now, in a world that's drowning in information, opinion, and tribal identity, the backfire effect is everywhere. People are not just believing false things. They're believing them harder when you try to correct them. So if you care about changing minds, yours or anyone else's, the answer isn't to yell louder or hit harder with facts. The answer is to slow down, listen deeper, and talk like someone who actually wants to understand. Because sometimes the strongest belief in the room isn't the one backed by truth. It's the one most tied to a person's sense of who they are. The sleeper effect. You know what's wild. You can hear a total lie, something from a shady source, a tabloid headline, some clickbait garbage, and in that moment, you know it's trash. You roll your eyes. You don't believe it, but give it time. A few days. A couple weeks, you'll forget where you heard it, and suddenly, it feels kinda true. That is the sleeper effect, and it's not just annoying, it's dangerous. It means the brain can reject a message at first, but still absorb it, still store it. And then later, when the details blur, when the original source fades into the background, you remember the message, but forget that it came from somewhere completely unreliable. And now, without the warning label, your brain just files it under probably true. This is how misinformation sticks, not by being convincing, but by being forgettable in just the right way. Let's say you're scrolling late at night. You see a headline that says something absurd, like eating ice cubes causes weight loss. It's from a website you've never heard of, clearly spammy, covered in weird ads. You laugh. You move on, but 3 weeks later, someone at work mentions they're trying to lose weight, and without thinking, you blurt out, "You know what I read once? Something about ice cubes speeding up metabolism." Boom. Sleeper effect. You forgot the sketchy source. You remembered the claim. And now you're repeating it like a fact. This doesn't just happen with health fads. It happens with politics, history, culture, gossip, even your own memories. And the scariest part, it doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter how skeptical you try to be. This effect works because of how memory functions. When you first hear something, your brain stores both the content and the source. But over time, the source decays faster than the message. You stop remembering who told you, but you still remember what they said. And once the origin fades, your natural defenses lower. Now here's where it gets messier. Sometimes, the less trustworthy the source is, the more powerful the sleeper effect becomes over time. Because when you hear a message from someone you don't trust, your brain initially discounts it. It goes, "Nope, this isn't reliable." But later, when the messenger disappears from memory, that same message just floats back into your mind without resistance, like a Trojan horse. You ever meet someone and they say something shady about a person you just met, but you take it with a grain of salt because, well, they're shady. But weeks later, you can't help but feel weird about that new person. You don't even remember why. You just have this vague impression. That's the sleeper effect, too. It's emotional residue from a forgotten source, and advertisers know this. Propagandists definitely know this. They're not always trying to convince you today. Sometimes the goal is to plant a seed and wait for your memory to do the rest. Because if they can get a message in front of you, even if it's met with skepticism, they've started the clock. And eventually, that skepticism fades. What remains is a half-formed memory that feels familiar, and familiar things feel true. It's the same reason people say, "I don't know where I heard this, but I think," or "it might not be totally accurate, but I remember something about." Those phrases are red flags. That's the sleeper effect in action. And by the way, this also works in reverse. Sometimes people dismiss real facts just because they forgot how credible the source actually was. If you heard something valuable from a boring professor or a quiet expert, and then weeks later you recall the info but forget who said it, you might write it off as a random thought, even though it came from a legitimate authority. So yeah, your memory isn't just imperfect. It's biased toward the message, not the truth behind it. Now the big question: how do you protect yourself? First, get intentional about tagging information when you receive it. Don't just absorb the content. Mentally attach the source. Say it out loud if you have to. This came from a social media post with no data behind it. Or this came from a peer-reviewed study. Label it clearly in your mind. That mental footnote will stick longer. Second, when something feels true, but you can't remember where you heard it, pause. That's your cue. Ask yourself, am I trusting this because it makes sense, or because I've heard it before? Repetition isn't proof. It's just a memory trick. And third, stay humble. Your brain is a meaning-making machine, not a truth detector. It will piece together fragments, impressions, half-baked ideas, and turn them into convictions. And if you're not careful, you'll start believing things you once knew were false, just because enough time passed. The sleeper effect doesn't shout. It doesn't argue. It doesn't debate. It just waits. Silently, patiently. And when you stop paying attention to where the message came from, it slips back in, dressed like something you chose to believe all along. The curse of knowledge. Ever tried explaining something to someone and they just don't get it? You're walking them through it, step by step, thinking you're being clear, but they keep asking questions, confused, frustrated, and you're like, "Come on, it's not that hard." That right there is not a communication problem. It's not about intelligence. It's the curse of knowledge. Once you know something, it becomes almost impossible to imagine not knowing it. Your brain edits out the memory of being confused. So when you're teaching, or explaining, or trying to help, you leave out critical context. You assume they know the basics, and when they don't, it feels like they are the problem. But really, it's just your brain playing tricks on you. Let's make this real. Say you're a designer, and you've been using Photoshop for 5 years. You're trying to teach your friend how to use layers. To you, it's second nature. But to them, it's like watching magic. Every move you make is packed with invisible assumptions, shortcuts, terms, tools you don't even think to explain. Because to you, they're obvious, but they're not obvious. They're learned. The curse of knowledge makes you blind to your own learning curve. You forget how hard it was to get here. And it gets worse. When someone doesn't understand, your brain actually gets impatient. You assume they're not paying attention, or they're just slow. But really, you've skipped 10 mental steps without realizing it. That's why explaining things to kids is so humbling. You suddenly realize how much you're taking for granted. This curse shows up everywhere. In teaching, in leadership, in relationships, in parenting. Ever seen a teacher explain something in a way that only makes sense to someone who already understands it? That's the curse. Ever had a boss give you vague instructions that leave you more confused than before? That's the curse. Ever had someone say, just be yourself, or it's easy, just do it like this, and you want to scream? Yup. That's the curse, and it's not always obvious. Because once something clicks in your brain, it feels simple. You literally lose access to the state of mind you were in before you understood it. It's like trying to describe color to someone who's never seen. You know what it looks like, but you can't translate it cleanly. You think you're being clear, but your words don't land the same way. This is one of the biggest reasons communication fails. Not because people are dumb, not because they're not listening, but because the speaker is operating from a different mental universe, and they don't realize it. And here's where it gets even sneakier. The smarter or more experienced you are, the more vulnerable you become. Because the more you know, the harder it is to imagine not knowing. Expertise becomes a wall, and the only way around it is empathy. If you want to communicate better, truly, deeply better, you have to slow down. You have to rewind your brain, walk yourself back to when you were clueless. What confused you? What tripped you up? What was not obvious until someone pointed it out? It takes effort. It takes humility. But it changes everything. Great communicators aren't the ones who know the most. They're the ones who remember what it's like to know the least. This is why some of the most helpful people are not the top experts. They're the ones just a few steps ahead, because they still remember the struggle. Their knowledge is still fresh enough to explain in plain language. They haven't been cursed by fluency. And this doesn't just apply to technical skills. It shows up in emotions, too. If you've healed from something, heartbreak, anxiety, shame, it's easy to look at someone still in pain and think, just let it go, or it's not that bad. But that's the curse again. You're seeing things through the lens of your current understanding, forgetting how hard it was before the clarity came. You've upgraded your perspective, but they haven't yet. And the gap between those two realities is where miscommunication lives. So how do you break the curse? Step 1. Stop assuming clarity. Ask, pause, and check in. Say things like, does that make sense so far? Or what part feels confusing? That one habit alone can save you from hours of frustration. Step 2. Use stories. Examples. Analogies. The human brain learns through connection. If you can tie your knowledge to something relatable, you build a bridge instead of a wall. And step 3. Stay curious. Not just about what you know, but about what other people don't. If someone misunderstands you, don't get annoyed. Get interested. Try to see the gap through their eyes. That curiosity turns miscommunication into insight, because at the end of the day, knowing something deeply is powerful, but being able to explain it clearly, in a way anyone can grasp, that's real mastery. The curse of knowledge is sneaky. It convinces you that you're being obvious when you're actually being cryptic. It tells you your message is clear when it's completely coded. But the moment you notice it, the moment you catch yourself skipping steps, that's when you start becoming a better teacher, a better leader, a better human. Remember, the biggest barrier to understanding is not ignorance. It's the illusion that understanding has already happened. And if you can break that illusion, even just a little, your words stop sounding smart and start actually making sense. The empathy gap. You ever tell yourself, calm and collected, that you're never going to lose it again? Never going to yell, never going to send that risky text, never going back to that person. You say it with full conviction. It feels solid, rational, bulletproof. But then something happens. You get triggered. Emotions rush in, and before you know it, you're doing the exact thing you swore you'd never do. That disconnect. That's the empathy gap. The empathy gap is the brain's complete inability to imagine how we'll think, feel, or behave when we're in a different emotional state than the one we're in right now. So if you're calm, you cannot truly predict what you'll do when you're scared. If you're full, you forget what hunger feels like. If you're in control, you massively underestimate how powerful your next panic attack, craving, or burst of rage is going to be. It's not a weakness. It's baked into the wiring. And it works both ways. When you're emotionally overwhelmed, in pain, in fear, in heat, you can't even remember what your logical, calm self sounds like. You feel like this emotion will last forever, like you'll always be this way. Even when you're telling yourself you know better, it doesn't matter. Because you're not feeling better. You're just intellectually aware of what better was. You can see it clearly in addiction. When someone's sober, they feel strong. They believe the craving will come, and they'll say no. They believe that because in that moment they're not craving, they can't simulate the storm that's coming. But when it hits, logic doesn't stand a chance. Emotion floods everything. The same brain, but completely different rules. It shows up in parenting, too. You imagine you'll be patient. You'll stay calm. You'll never raise your voice. And then, the sleep deprivation kicks in, the constant demands, the noise, and suddenly you snap. And afterward, you're left wondering, how did I even get there? The answer is simple. You made that promise from one emotional state and tried to apply it to another you couldn't feel yet. It even plays out in love. After a breakup, people say, "I'll never go back." That door is closed, and they believe it. But they're saying it from a place of strength. Then one lonely night sneaks in, one memory replays in just the right way, and the emotional version of you makes the call, sends the message, reopens the door. And it's like watching someone else do it, but that someone is you. This gap isn't just about high drama moments either. It affects simple things, like planning. You ever go grocery shopping while you're full? You buy salad, protein, water. You're a picture of health. But catch yourself shopping when you're starving. Suddenly, you're throwing cookies and frozen pizza into the cart like you're planning for the apocalypse. Same person, totally different logic. That's the empathy gap again. Your current emotional state shaping your decisions without your permission. Now, here's where it gets dangerous. This gap also messes with how we judge other people. When we're calm and someone else is emotional, we assume they're irrational or weak, because we've forgotten what that state feels like. We say things like, just calm down, or don't take it so seriously, not because we're heartless, but because we literally cannot empathize with what they're experiencing from where we're standing. And the opposite is true, too. When we're emotional and someone else is calm, we think they don't get it. We think they're being cold or dismissive. But really, they're just on the other side of the emotional divide, and neither side can fully cross over. So what do you do with this? First, stop pretending your future self is a different species. You are not magically more rational tomorrow. You're still you. So instead of making promises you can't keep, build systems for the moments when emotion takes the wheel. Put your phone in another room when you're angry. Block the contact you always reach out to when you're lonely. Have a rule that you sleep on big decisions before making them. You don't need more willpower. You need fewer opportunities for chaos to hijack your plans. Second, rehearse emotional scenarios. When you're calm, walk yourself through what happens when you're not. Ask yourself, what does angry me usually do? What does sad me forget? What would scared me need to hear? The more familiar you become with your own emotional patterns, the more power you have to intervene. Third, be slower to judge people in their bad moments. Remind yourself they're not acting from where you're standing. They're acting from a storm you can't feel. That doesn't mean you excuse everything, but it does mean you respond with more humanity and less snap judgment. And last, remember this truth: emotional states are temporary, but the consequences of what you do in them are not. When you feel overwhelmed, when your world is shaking, when your emotions are screaming, pause. Just pause. Remind yourself that this version of you is real, but not final. It will pass. You don't need to act from it. You just need to wait for the other side of you to come back online, because the empathy gap is powerful. But awareness is more powerful. And the moment you stop believing that now you can perfectly predict future you, is the moment you finally gain control. The law of triviality. You ever sit in a meeting where everyone spends 20 minutes arguing over what color the new chairs should be, but no one says a word about the budget? Or maybe your group chat blows up over whether the logo should be blue or green, but nobody touches the real issue, like how to actually launch the thing. That's not just people being weird. That's a psychological trap. It has a name. It's called the Law of Triviality, also known as the bike shed effect. Here's how it works. When people are presented with a simple issue and a complex one, they spend way more time and energy talking about the simple one. Why? Because they understand it. It feels safe. It feels like their opinion matters. And it gives them the emotional reward of contributing, without the risk of sounding ignorant. So we obsess over the color of the bike shed and completely ignore the design of the nuclear reactor. That is literally where the term came from. Now pause and think about how often this plays out in real life. Your company is trying to decide on a multi-million-dollar strategy, but the whole conversation gets hijacked by someone arguing about the font on the slide. Or your family is supposed to be planning a serious financial decision, but everyone gets hung up on who's bringing dessert. It sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud, but in the moment, it feels normal, because the small thing is easier to talk about. This isn't just about bad prioritization. It's about the psychology of comfort. See, complex issues feel heavy. They're filled with unknowns. They threaten our competence. They make us feel unsure of ourselves. But a trivial issue, like how something looks, or what to name it, or whether the logo should be a little to the left, that's familiar territory. That feels like a win. So we default to the thing that lets us feel smart instead of the thing that requires us to be brave. And it gets worse in groups, because once someone brings up a simple topic, everyone else suddenly lights up. They all have an opinion. They all understand it. So it feels like real discussion is happening. You get that illusion of productivity. But underneath, the real work, the stuff that matters, is being completely ignored. Social media is flooded with this. People will passionately debate surface level stuff, like a celebrity's outfit, or the title of a movie, or how someone worded a post, while ignoring the deeper systemic issues right in front of them. It's not because people don't care. It's because deep down, we're wired to latch onto what we understand. And most of us were never trained to think clearly about complexity. Now here's the trap. The law of triviality feels like engagement. It feels like leadership. It feels like you're getting somewhere. But it is a dangerous detour. Because while everyone's arguing over paint colors, the structure is collapsing. While you're editing comma placements, the core message is getting lost. While you're perfecting the branding, the actual product is going to market unfinished. This effect doesn't just waste time. It creates false confidence. It convinces people that, because they discussed something at length, they must have made progress. But really, they just avoided the hard part. And often, by the time someone points it out, it's too late. So what do you do about it? First, recognize the moment it shows up. If a group is spending a suspicious amount of time on a tiny decision, ask yourself, what's the big thing we're avoiding? Is there an elephant in the room? A topic that's too intimidating, so everyone just dances around it. Second, speak directly to the avoidance. You do not have to be aggressive. You can just say, hey, I think we're focusing on the easy stuff. Should we zoom out for a second and check whether we're hitting the real issue? You'd be shocked how often people are relieved that someone said it out loud. Third, don't shame yourself if you catch yourself doing it. You're not lazy or dumb. You're human. Your brain is trying to feel safe. But that moment of awareness is powerful. Because now, you can choose the hard thing. You can sit in the discomfort of not having all the answers, and still lean into the complex problem. And lastly, start making it a habit to rank conversations by impact. Ask, is this discussion about a detail or about a direction? Details are fine, they matter. But they should never replace the deeper work of strategy, alignment, purpose, and execution. The law of triviality is subtle. It hides in harmless comments and tiny distractions. But over time, it kills momentum. It derails great projects. And it gives people the illusion of progress while they slowly drift away from what actually matters. So next time you find yourself passionately debating the color of the bike shed, pause, zoom out, and ask the question no one wants to ask. Because someone has to, and usually the one who does. That's the real leader in the room.